Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on teleSUR. Deep gazes filled with struggles and stories. Struggles that transcend generation. Know the deepest realities through its protagonists on teleSUR documentaries. Sunday, only on teleSUR.
Welcome. Thanks for tuning in for a special program on Venezuela's historic consultative referendum for the defense of the Essequibo. I'm Luis Alberto Matos and I will be your host. We have a team ready in our headquarters in Caracas with Gladys Quesada and Jorge Gestoso, who will be joined by analysts to better understand the context and importance of this referendum. Let's first begin our program by going over the 5 questions that Venezuelans were called to vote on.
Are proposed for the referendum in the defense of the Guyana Essequiba, and the first one is: do you agree to reject by all means, in accordance with the law, the line fraudulently interposed by the Paris Arbitration Award of 1899, which seeks to dispose us of our Guyana Essequiba? The second question is: do you support the 1966 Geneva Agreement as the only valid legal instrument to reach practical and satisfactory solution for Venezuela and Guyana regarding the dispute over the territory of the Guyana Essequiba? The third question: do you agree with Venezuela's historical position or not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to solve the territorial disputes over Guyana Essequiba? The fourth question is: do you agree to oppose, by all means in accordance with the law, Guyana's attempt to unilaterally take possession of a pending sea delimitation illegally and violation of the international law? And the fifth and last question: do you agree with the creation of the Guyana Essequiba State and the development of accelerated plan for the comprehensive care of the current and future population of that territory, including, among others, the guaranteeing of Venezuelan citizenship and identity cards in accordance with the Geneva Agreement and international law, thus incorporating said state to the map of Venezuela territory?
So those were the 5 questions that over 20 million Venezuelans were called to vote today on this important historic consultative referendum. And as we continue with our special program, let's tune in with our headquarters in Caracas with Gladys Quesada, who's ready for us.
Thanks for the contact, Luis. Thanks for this moment here in from the South and teleSUR English in this special coverage of the consultative referendum on the Guyana Essequiba. This is a key moment in Venezuelan history because all the people is defending the territory and the integrity of the territory, and also the people is taking an active stance on this dispute, this territorial dispute with Guyana. Now is my honor and my pleasure to receive Diego Sequeira, who is an international analyst and also an expert on Venezuelan issues and Venezuelan topics. Be welcome, Diego.
Thank you for having me. Sort of an expert.
Well, we all try. Okay, so Diego, one of the main topics that today is the worries or maybe the talks and the dialogues among Venezuelans is this referendum on the Guyana Essequiba region. I know that many people is consulting the internet, Googling, and trying to find the answers. And as we know, the Guyana Essequiba, better known as the Essequibo region, is a landmark place, is a territory, is a region between what we know legally as Venezuela and what we know legally as Guyana, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
Correct.
So historically, it has been administered by Guyana, and it belongs even though the request and the claims and the dispute, to the Venezuelan map. But let's go first, before we talk about that, let's talk about the beginning of the history on the Guyana Essequiba region. I have an interesting fact that I wanted to discuss with you. Back in the Elizabeth, the first times in the United Kingdom, she sent, as we know, she sent explorers, rangers even, yes, to these regions, to the unknown new world. And back then, Sir Walter Raleigh, he came here and he explored, and he was the first one to write a document on the Guyana and the Essequiba region also. Correct. And he described the supposed richness and the supposed resources and the findings of gold. From that point on, which are the main highlights, the main points of this construction of Guyana and this appropriation of the Guyana Essequiba, and how it has developed for Venezuela and Guyana also?
Yes, well, first of all, you know, you can see each and every map, even pre-independent Venezuela. You know, the most important land delimitations came after late 18th century with the Bourbonic reforms during Charles III, Carlos III. And that's what's actually when Venezuela had like a new administrative delimitation of its own territory, in which of course included parts of what's now called the Essequiba, and also parts of what now it's currently Brazil and Colombia also. I mean, it was a...
To the south.
Yes, exactly. And then to the west, it was a way more larger territory back then, and that's like the basics, and that's the let's call it the cartography, which the independence is based on. And in this case, La Guyana Essequiba was also part of the La Guyana, which actually was decisive during the independence. It was like what they call the Third Republic. You know, during our independence, we had like a first, a second, and a third republic, because the first two projects basically collapsed because of administrative, political complications and problems and whatnot, and contradictions also. Okay. And on the second, that was the first republic, and that failed that would be 1812. And then we had a second republic, which social issues actually overwhelmed the most valuable causes of independence, because all the class issues came up, and it was like the hardest lesson for all the liberators, starting with Bolivar himself, something he acknowledges several times. There's a lot of written documentary testimony of this experience. And then we had the Third Republic, which actually basically started in La Guyana, which is Bolivar State. Would be like the right bank of the Orinoco River. Also, their own limits would be the Essequibo River back then. And it was the base from where not only the military campaigns afterwards started in liberating the territory, but also where the republic was founded by itself. I mean, the concept of republic and the legal structure of it and everything else, and actually the fate of the republic started right there. I mean, in Angostura, in Ciudad Bolívar currently. Okay. But it's the same region, and it was part of it. And even back then, we started to have a lot of issues with the first encounters, let's call it that way, with the U.S. vessels and also the British vessels, the British Crown, because we had also British fighters that came over to Venezuela during those campaigns. But that's when it started, the first context, but not only context, but also the first strifes, conflicts between us. And because, of course, there was a lot of interest in what was going on. You have first, I mean, the Sir Walter Raleigh writings are like 200 years before that. And so it was already in sight of the British Crown as to what extent and to what interest these area, which is very hard to rule, to appease, because it's, well, to
control.
Yeah, to control basically, and especially if you are an embattled republic that just came after independence and with a a huge rate of deaths and destruction, because that's how it was here in Venezuela.
Yeah, and the power imbalance, if you're going to think about it, the power imbalance, because the UK and the British Empire, it is an empire. It has years.
No,
and
for sure. And I
centuries.
mean, we're talking about that. I mean, the major powerhouse during those years. I'm talking about
Exactly.
the half of, a bit more before the half, but most of the 19th century, the major power was actually the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And especially in trade, and also in control of the trade routes, and in control of the resources that they're interested in, and how they were going to extract them from some places. And also they were pretty masterful and able to find loopholes and voids, legal voids, into where to go into them and exploit them from their own benefit. And that's actually the history of a lot of places, not only in Latin America. You can also think about, for example, Gibraltar in Spain. I mean, it's the same thing. Strategic places with strategic meanings, be it geographical or in a matter of resources. That's how the Essequibo region actually came into their sight, because there were also further explorations that showed in that back in the day that the whole huge amount of resources, and we're talking about mineral and the ones they were able to detect back then, as in gold, for example. Basically, and most importantly, gold, but not only gold. It was also about geography. It was also about location, and it was also about how near from their own enclaves they used to have before that they grew the same logical interest they had in other critical areas of the, let's call it, I'm not friendly with this term, but let's call it that way because it's easier, with the Western Hemisphere in general.
Well,
Think about Belize, for example. Think about Uruguay. Think about Malvinas. Think about Brazil. You have a lot of places where British diplomacy basically shaped territorially a lot of places, because they were actually able to, wield the power that was decisive enough to impose their will.
yeah, they tried to do that with Cuba too.
Exactly.
Yeah, they appropriated Havana and the surrounding territories for 6 months, and they did the same
Exactly.
until they had to go away.
Exactly. So it's the same framework. You can also think about Argentina back then, even Buenos Aires back then. I mean, there was actually the Argentine independence has like this kernel that's very important, based on the struggle against the Brits who occupied Buenos Aires back then. I mean, I'm talking about 1810, 1812. But that's how that influence is visible physically, because you also had the other one, which was diplomacy and also let's covert politics. I mean, the first covert groups, let's call it intelligence. I mean, it's not in the modern sense of intelligence agencies, but it was basically kind of like that, and how they influenced key actors and key people who were also take up a stand about some issue, a current issue, and how these UK spies or influencers, to call it in a more contemporary way, would try to shape up things not only on the ground but also on paper.
Yeah, exactly.
So you had this quarrel that happened in the late 19th century in Venezuela. It's more like a 20-year situation. There's a dispute between Venezuela and the British Foreign Office from that moment on, which, that's like the first starting point of what we are at where we at right now. That's those intrigues, those pressures, those interests, and those we can call it even defeats from the Venezuelan side in the foreign policy battlefield were the ones that shaped what happened in 1899, finally. And it had to do also with how some Venezuelan actors within the foreign ministry actually conceded willfully in favor of foreign powers to give away or to silently acknowledge the situation as it was back then.
Exactly. They, I think there is a parallel between Venezuela and Cuba, and I beg your pardon if I do many parallels in Latin America and in Cuba in this specific case. But it's the same. Once and once again, we see how the main powers in that time, they took this legal voids you were talking about, they took it and they fill it with their reasons, their justifications to appropriate of their territories. Is the core of the new ways of colonization.
Yeah, exactly. It's the pattern of aggression. That's like a British historian, by the way, named Kate Hudson, talked about how they did the same thing, for example, because this is basically a template. They did the same thing in Kosovo. I mean, 100 years afterwards, you know what I mean? Is that this is the basis which this rationale and this methodology actually was installed and was so effective and also perfected in time, you know, and you can see that even before the El Essequibo, before Guyana, you can see it in other places. You have like this very smart, very aggressive and complex figures like Lord Ponsonby, you know, the guy who basically created Uruguay but also created Belgium. These guys were expert in balkanizing territory in order to benefit their own access to resources or to political control, political leverage on the recently independent nations. So exactly. That's also in this case, and also that's what actually it's the the background of the
politics, the ways.
No, in what happened in Paris, the Paris.
The Paris Agreement.
Yeah, the Paris Agreement. I mean, that's how it actually happened. You have actually the one who defended Venezuela was actually the U.S. based on the Monroe Doctrine precisely.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the examples of how the U.S. replies to this element.
Yeah, precisely. I want to save that main topic you were speaking about then.
Sure.
Because the Monroe policy, the Monroe Doctrine, it has another chapter on its own.
For sure. Well, and in a way, this was another chapter. Maybe could look apparently in favor of the Americas, but it wasn't.
Yeah, in favor of who
was able to control and manage the situation afterwards. That's what the dispute between these two.
And in which ways? But that is a topic for a second time, because now we are going to give Havana back the signal, and I'm back to you, Luis. So the stage and the signal is yours.
Thank you, Gladys. Very interesting analysis for the beginning of our special program. So what is the historical context that led to the first question of this historical referendum? We'll tell you about it in this special series to understand the dispute of more than a century, which is also considered the longest in the Republican history of Venezuela. Our correspondent Marlene Garcia has the details.
What is the historical context that led to the formulation of the first question of the Consultative Referendum of December 3rd in defense of the Guyana Essequiba? We tell you in this special series to understand this controversy of more than a century, also considered the longest in the Republican history of Venezuela. I am right in front of the de facto line. The 1966 Geneva Agreement state that Guyana and Venezuela must settle the dispute friendly, pacifically, and through a practical and convenient solution for both parties. This is the Cuyuni River, and on the other shore begins the Guyana Essequiba territory of almost 160,000 square kilometers that was plundered by the United Kingdom from Venezuela in 1899, in what is known as the Arbitration Award that was signed in Paris under deception, manipulation of maps, and fraudulent border lines.
The first world effect before the United Nations when signing the Geneva Agreement is to make it clear that the Essequibo dispute has not been solved and that the agreement, the arbitration award of 1999, was null and void and remains pending to be denounced.
And the fact is that Right there, one of the Schomburg lines that goes from the exit to the Atlantic to the border with Brazil was staked out. Schomburg was a German that since 1835 was staking out the territory, opening the way to the occupation of the United Kingdom and progressive plundering of the Venezuelan territory. Venezuela has in its possession a key document that over the years was declassified. It is the British Parliamentary Papers of 1840 that show the true intentions of the United Kingdom and reveal its unnatural and fraudulent modus operandi. The map shows nothing more and nothing less than gold in all the territory.
Here is the Essequibo, and look how they got in there. Look how it started. Look how they got in there, but look at the reason. Gold, 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 gold. Let's assume it was gold, and here's why they come in here.
Because of all this, Venezuelan will be asked, do you agree to reject by all means, in accordance with the law, the line that was fraudulently imposed by the Paris Arbitration Award of 1899, which sought to impose Venezuela of the Guyana Essequiba? This is one of the questions that Guyana is asking the International Court of Justice to prohibit, because it is precisely asking that the court enforce the arbitration award that disposes Venezuela of its territory in 1899. I will continue to explain the context of the question in another series.
Soy Madeleine García, desde la línea de facto.
And we continue with a special coverage of today's paramount consultative referendum in defense of the Essequibo territory. We're now going to tune in with a special set also in Caracas with Jorge Gestoso, who is joined by a special guest to continue analyzing this important day.
Thanks very much, Luis. We have the honor to have with us another guest, Calvin Tucker. Thank you very much for joining us. Calvin, just for the audience, you're the campaign manager for the Morning Star, which means that it's the only socialist daily newspaper in the United Kingdom.
That's correct, thank you.
Calvin, you have been participating also in the event of the 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine. For an audience that is not necessarily familiar what is the Monroe Doctrine, is President of the US, James Monroe, in 1823, had a phrase that he said, "America for the Americans." In your opinion, the Monroe Doctrine is alive and kicking, or is dead?
I think if we look at the history of the United States in the 20th century right up to the present day, it's absolutely crystal clear that the Monroe Doctrine is both alive and kicking and extremely flexible in its application.
Interesting that in your case, meaning in the case of the United Kingdom, it has a facet, an angle in this events of the Essequibo, because we're talking that the United Kingdom was taking over Guyana, and therefore it was controversy about what is the division of the land, of the borders with Venezuela. So the United Kingdom was, and eventually indirectly still is, in the center of this event. Tell us.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the conflict over the territory of Essequibo, it goes back, in fact, centuries. But Britain's role was to slowly push the borders of the British territory of Guyana slowly westward. And that culminated in the biased treaty in 1899, which granted Britain control over that territory. And what viewers in Britain or North America might not understand is that Venezuelan representatives were not participating in that tribunal. And yet the International Court of Justice has just the other day had a judgment that treaty stands and supersedes the 1966 Geneva Accords, which were to provide the framework for an amicable agreement between Venezuela, Guyana, and Britain.
So basically, historically, we were talking that, for example, the Monroe Doctrine, supposedly saying that America for the Americans was to defend the continent against the former colonizers, including the United Kingdom. So basically, at the end of the day, also the US is not defending America, is joining forces with the United Kingdom against Venezuela.
Absolutely, and of course, the United States is the offspring of my country. And I think that explains an awful lot of American history.
So, and how do you put in perspective today's event, today's plebiscite, referendum, how you see it? What's your assessment?
Well, I mean, my assessment of it is that this conflict is principally about whose side prevails. Does Guyana, backed by the United States, backed by ExxonMobil, who have 10 years ago had a huge discovery of oil and natural gas and other minerals in Essequiba, does their side prevail, and does the ruling of the tribunal in 1899 prevail, or do the Geneva Accords prevail from 1966? Now, that might appear to be simply a technical issue, but on what planet does an agreement of 125 years ago, where one party to the conflict was not present, prevail and supersede the later agreement in modern times in 1966, which set out a framework for the resolution of the discussion, which took into the dispute rather, which took into account the interests and sovereignty of all the parties involved. It seems very clear to me that 1966 supersedes 1899.
And in terms of managing the message, we're talking about rhetoric. Guyana is trying to paint themselves that they are the victims. That is Venezuela, the country that is aggressing them, that they're trying to take part of their interests, when in reality the fact is that Guyana, without having dissolved and respond about a part of, especially the waters around, they're using it, and also including parts of the waters that belongs to Venezuela. So basically, if there's someone or a country that is basically aggressed or victim, is Venezuela. It's not exactly what Guyana says, which is quite the contrary.
Well, of course. I mean, for the past over 50 years since 1966, there's been little, if any, progress on resolving this dispute. Now, it may well be that there are some aspects to Guyana's case which are legitimate and credible, but that can only be settled within the framework of talks between the two countries. But what Guyana has done, and actually I say Guyana, but really we're talking about the United States behind them and the big oil companies behind Guyana. I think it's really a dispute with the United States and with ExxonMobil more than it's a dispute with Guyana. But what's actually happened in the current context is that you have this huge oil find. Of course, Guyana wants to keep all this for itself. You've only got 125,000 people living in this territory in pretty grim conditions without much human rights, with a fairly low level of social and economic development. So quite clearly the interests of the people who live there have not been taken into account in modern times either. And I think that's a factor that's often overlooked in this dispute.
You've been visiting Venezuela many times. This is not your first time. What you have witnessed since you came here for the first time?
Well, I first came here in 2001, just after 9/11, the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. And I have to say, this was only 10 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and I didn't take this process seriously at the time. I'd heard of this guy, Hugo Chavez, with a red hat, and I just assumed he was another Latin American populist, and this would quickly drift into the normal form of authoritarian rule, with ordinary people being left behind and left out of that process. And when I first came here at the time, I was absolutely struck by the sense of excitement in the streets. People really felt that the old system had failed them in a most spectacular way, both economically in terms of their basic services, but also with their human rights. People here in Caracas were massacred in 1988 in the in what was called the Caracazo, where the government sent the army into the barrios to shoot ordinary people, women and children, people who were stealing spaghetti to eat. And Hugo Chavez, interestingly, somebody who came from a military background, an unusual background for somebody on the left, had rebelled against this system in 1992 and had been jailed and then later released and had stood for president.
Right, won the election in 1998 and
Yeah.
took over in 1999.
Yeah.
And then?
And then, curiously, when Chavez first came into office, he didn't describe himself as a socialist at all. In fact, he looked towards my country, towards Tony Blair at the time, looked for some kind of third way between capitalism and socialism. And it was really the attitude of the domestic elites here, big business here, and the institutions here, together with opposition from the United States, which prevented Chavez from implementing even a very modest program of social and economic reform. So I see Chavez's electoral victory very much as the electoral ratification of the military-civilian rebellion of 1992, and his economic and political program as something that was really developed on the job, as we would say in English, and he learnt his trade as a president and what worked and what didn't work in office, rather than having come to office with a preset ideology. So from that perspective, it's probably one of the most interesting political processes in world history.
The UK is not necessarily the best friend from this revolution, if you want. So much so that, for example, there is gold deposited in the central bank in the UK. The president of Venezuela wants that gold that belongs to Venezuela back, and the UK refuses. The UK recognized as a president someone who stand on the street one day and say, I'm the new president. So there's still that mentality of colonialism from the UK to Venezuela and to Latin America?
Absolutely. I mean, I wish I could apologise on behalf of King Charles for the nefarious role that Britain has played in the internal affairs of Venezuela over many years. Of course, we are considered in global terms the poodle of the United States. Policy is set in Washington and in Downing Street, the home of the British Prime Minister. The general consensus politically in Britain is that we must carry out US policy. So that's the central reason why Britain has taken a hostile attitude to Venezuela, specifically with regards to the gold that's being held in the vaults of the Bank of England. It's over $1 billion of Venezuela's gold. It's your natural resource. You stored it with us in good faith, and when you came back to ask for your property to be returned, we said no, it belongs to a self-declared president, Juan Guaido, who never even stood for the position as president in the first place. But what's most concerning about this is even the opposition in Venezuela has removed Juan Guaido as their leader.
It's gone.
So there is no dispute globally. There is no dispute here that there is only one president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and there is only one government in Venezuela. So if this gold doesn't belong to Venezuela, to the government of Venezuela, it certainly can't belong to Juan Guaido. So we have no legal basis or moral or political basis
not to give it back to the official government of President Maduro.
And I'd just like to add something else. This is not simply a matter of legal technicalities. From the perspective of Britain, what kind of signal are we sending out to the world that you store your property, you do business with Britain, and we may or may not give back what is rightfully yours? I'd say that sends an extremely poor message of reliability of Britain as a government and the reliability of British business. I'd say it's bad for investment in Britain. But more importantly, when I walk around the streets of Caracas or other parts of Venezuela, people here are suffering under sanctions. Your public services have decayed from the high point of Chavismo. The transportation system has problems, the health system has problems. Your country needs this gold returned so it can be spent on providing a decent standard of living and a future for people that live here. And that's the most important thing in this dispute.
Calvin Tucker, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We have been talking with Calvin Tucker. Officially, his title is Campaign Manager for the Morning SUR, the only socialist daily newspaper in the United Kingdom. We get back to you now.
Thank you, Festoso, and also to your guest, Calvin Tucker, to continue shedding light on the subject of colonialism and its policies and how it still reflects on today's and it affects, in this case, in particular, the Venezuelan people. Let's take now the time to review the environmental field of the Essequibo, a territory that has an extension of more than 149,500 square kilometers, and 73% of it corresponds to the hydrographic basin of the river Essequibo.
In all this extension, there is a wide biodiversity where 58 endemic species of fish have been identified, which are found only in this territory, more than 900 birds, about 10,000 plants, and 60 amphibians, including some endangered species. This enormous diversity of life is threatened by illegal mining, an activity that has no legal basis in this disputed region since the 1966 Geneva Agreement, that in its fifth article states that until the conflict is resolved, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana must not grant mining, forestry, or other concessions to transnational projects that affect the natural resources. As part of the mining activity, there is a strong deforestation reported by the Global Forest Change Observatory, which indicates that between 2000 and 2020, the area covered by forest has been reduced, and it is observed that in the last 5 years, the loss of forest has sped up, which is at least 63,444 hectares, what represents 47% of the total reported during these 20 years.
And we continue with a special program covering this special referendum, the Consultative Referendum in defense of the Essequibo. If you just tune in, we have been talking with different guests in unison with Gladys Quesada and Festoso, who are in Caracas. We're now going back again with Gladys Quesada to continue analyzing the importance of and the repercussions of this referendum.
Thanks, Luis, for the time again, and we retake the dialogue with Diego Cerquera. And as we were announcing and presenting him, he is an expert on Venezuelan issues and also an international analyst. We welcome again, Diego.
Thank you.
So we left the dialogue regarding one main topic that I think is very discussed also today in Venezuela, because in Venezuela it is running up the forum of the 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine and the Monroe Policy. Right. So we were talking about this, And we were also talking about the discovery, to say in a way, of Guyana, quote unquote, the discovery of Guyana and the origins of this construction of the Essequibo region as a place of wealth and big resources and a land for grab also.
Yes, and that's a very important thing, because I was actually thinking about this because first of all, I just reminded probably a fun fact, but during the while Venezuela was in a major infighting which lasted several decades, in the La Guerra Federal, the Federal War, and all the successive conflicts that were related to land and power back then, that was the moment actually when the Brits were able to explore so easily all these areas, because we were actually dealing with something else, with our own sense of what was going to be finally the one who's going to be ruling the government and how it's going to be ruled and whatnot, right? So I was thinking this kind of fun facts. For example, remember that the explorer that the British Crown sent into Guyana, into the Guyana Essequiba, was a guy with the last name Schomburg, which, there's a Venezuelan word for crook, which is choro.
Okay.
Which comes from Schomburg, actually. It was a popularization of the word that actually still remains in Venezuelan vocabulary up to this day. So that kind of, those small details kind of, bring back how alive history is in this quarters. And also I was thinking about another thing. It's funny how for the Brits, it's always a matter of supposedly empty space, uninhabited space, according to them. And you can think about, for example, the case with Palestine. There's no difference. And the Balfour Declaration said there's no one there. Please address the World Zionist Conference, and because we need to populate this. But of course, there was people there.
Yeah.
We're talking about.
There was a culture there.
And it was already there for thousands of years.
Yes.
You have the same approach with the Essequibo in some way or another, with the Essequibano population. They didn't exist in all these exploration, in all these maps. It was the gold, it was all the resources that were important. And that was also the main reason, also the main matter why it was part of the Paris Laudatory Award. I don't know, I still forgot the...
Arbitrary award.
Yeah, the arbitrary award.
Yes.
I still forget the...
The exact translation.
Yeah, the exact translation, the legal translation of this,
Yes.
which is very sensitive. But anyway.
You have a very, very interesting topic there. That is the construction, as we were saying in the beginning of our conversation, the construction of maybe a wasteland, a land that is empty, that is abandoned, because that's the main, that's the guideline for them.
Yes, exactly.
That is abandoned and that doesn't belong to no one, is a no one or no man land.
Correct, yes.
So in that case, they find a way to appropriate. But let's talk about the Monroe Doctrine, because now we are taking this a further step. Okay?
Yes.
Because this is not only the UK, now is the US, and the way they're orchestrated behind the curtains, this appropriation or this, in this case, this disappropriation of the territory from Venezuela, and to put that in other hands conveniently. So what about that with the Monroe Doctrine and how that reflects and echoes in today's dispute and in today's challenges?
Sure. Well, it's pretty dramatic. Remember that back in the day, the only one that defended Venezuela, we were talking about it previously, was the U.S., but not defending Venezuela. They were defending their own influence in the region, in the hemisphere. It wasn't. It didn't have anything to do with Venezuela by itself.
And here I go again, defending Cuba before from the Spanish Empire, and in the end, in the bottom of that, the intentions of that objective was the appropriation of Cuba.
Yeah, it was basically control. Well, in the Cuban situation, it was even more dramatic.
2 years later also.
Exactly, yes. Well, in 1 year before, actually, it's the year where the U.S. empire actually expanded officially. Yeah. And you have like three major landmarks there. You have Cuba, you have Philippines, and you have also the 1,000-year war in the 1,000 Days War in Colombia, which actually ended up with the with the independence, quote unquote, of Panama. So it's a very mobile situation. It's a very dynamic moment. Actually, we're not taught. We weren't taught back in the day about this with this with this impression of how dynamic actually things were. Not for us, in a way, And also you can't rule out that it's also pretty close to the Berlin Conference, which is basically the starting line, the starting line, yes, for the scramble for Africa. So we're talking about actually that stage of imperialism and colonialism, in different, not only the U.S. but also in Europe and in Africa. It's part of the same rationale. Although the Essequibo affair, it's previous to this. So is like Malvinas, and so is like Gibraltar.
But it all belongs to the same pattern of appropriation and
aggression,
the same
expoliation.
path. It's the same path.
Absolutely. So the thing is that afterwards it turned more into it was contained in a way by the U.S. in order to the U.S. to manage it, and in accordance to another series of situations. You also have, for example, in Venezuela, 3 years afterwards, we have in the naval siege of Venezuela by Germans and French and Italian companies that actually moved the military. And what gave the final word on this situation was the U.S. It was the Monroe Doctrine one more time operating in this situation and saying we're not going to accept any European interference. And it had nothing to do with Venezuelan independence. It had to do with the U.S. control of the Caribbean rim in general, the Caribbean basin,
Yeah, because I want to tell this for our non-Spanish audiences and non-Spanish speaking audiences. For us, the Latin American people, maybe for someone that in the U.S., the Monroe Doctrine, it is about America for the people in America, but as the people in the U.S. consider themselves Americans, they think of Latin American territories as their own. So those are the premises.
At least they're under their sphere's influence, Maybe not direct control, occupation like Guantanamo, but yeah, exactly. But that's actually from the same.
Yeah, I know.
Same area, by the way, the same era, the same years, but at least control it, if not directly, by proxy.
Yes.
That's basically it. And you have that situation, and they even relied on the Brits, and you have to still manage the situation. Then we have to fast forward now. We can fast forward already to the Geneva Agreement in 1966, which was previously to Guyana actually become independent, and I quote unquote this because it's part of the Commonwealth still. So how independent actually Guyana is? It's an uncomfortable question. I'm just going to put it here. And
which is the extent of that independence?
Well, precisely how much, and remember that. Well, they had very important politicians. I mean, for example, the first ruler, Che de Yagan, was a very interesting character, very committed to his own people, not only his own ethnical people, but the whole of the demographics of what Guyana is, and also, the same with most of the English Caribbean. A very strong composition of African descent and Indian, also from India. I mean. Which is also very important. Muslim, an important Muslim component, and a smaller indigenous minority, of course. But the thing is that this was the moment when it was multilaterally acknowledged that this 1899 Paris
arbitrary
agreement.
Award,
correct. Award was.
Is even difficult to translate, and it's even difficult to speak about.
It was established, and so this is the moment when. Close. Yeah.
I have to stop you there because we have to
ahead.
give back the signal. So stop in there. We will talk again. So back to you, Luis.
Yes, Gladys, we are going live to Caracas. The Minister of Defense is offering statements. Let's listen.
A cada uno de los centros de votación, y hoy podemos decir que todos los centros de votación,
we can say today that every voting station And these voting stations, some of them were in places that was hard to get access to. And in the south of the country, we can see also voting stations in those places in the south of the country. Also in the Amazonas and neighboring areas, we provided voting stations for those people to cast their votes. We took the armed forces to all those places, and all that worked impeccably. But today is a day of national sovereignty. I would like to show a video that has been going around social media that shows the indigenous people of the Essequiba territory, where they are manifesting love and patriotism. And we wanted to show you this video so you can see we are ratifying today that the Essequiba territory is ours. This December 3rd marks a very important day. This land is ours, is going to be ours today and forever. This is something beautiful. This is an expression of love and patriotism for a country. We have seen lots of video during the day, similar to this one. You can see that the Venezuelan people is in power and is deciding. It has shows the path of liberty and emancipation. During the last 30 days, we have seen that the whole people in Venezuela has mobilized to support this referendum. We have seen songs and music and all sorts of expression or artistic expressions to support this day. So I would like to congratulate the Venezuelan people. We are writing new pages in history in the 21st century. And the impact that these actions, that this day, is something that made history. And we can say that we participated in this event, and once again, congratulations to the Venezuelan people. We would also like to thank the armed forces that worked during all this process and stayed united with the people. Policemen and firemen, the people, young people, children, women. All of them were organized and together. We all know that the Venezuelan Revolution has given an organized character to the people, and that's what we saw today. And well, I would like to congratulate every person in the armed forces for guaranteeing a peaceful day today without incidents. They did an excellent job during this day. So we can say that we did not have any negative actions or events during this day. I would like to give the floor to the Minister of Security so we can listen about the performance they had during this day. Thank you very much. Good evening. So all of us have been witness of what happened today. This is an historic moment that has marked a landmark in the history. This is a moment that has guaranteed Venezuelans to practice their constitutional right. It's something that ratifies our nationality and also is something that supports unity within the people, something that shows how much Venezuelans love their country. So all of them have gone to the police stations to cast their votes. Likewise, I would like to congratulate all the organizations that made this event possible. People that have been working behind the scenes in the voting stations. Also the armed forces that have guaranteed the peace and tranquility during the day. Always respecting the human rights of every citizen. Therefore, that's why I would like to congratulate the armed forces and other organizations that had to do with this event. We're going to see a brief video, that shows the performance of the armed forces during this day. And over the last day, and now we will take a look. We have seen here a video that shows the love, ethics, and moral of the people in Venezuela. It shows how the armed forces have performed before every attempt that we have here in Venezuela. It shows that Venezuela and armed forces are together. We could appreciate everything that the Venezuelan Revolution has brought to the Venezuelan people. Now I will give the floor to Domingo Hernandez. Thank you very much. Good evening. This is nothing more than ratification of the Venezuelan people while they're casting their votes, and the National Electoral Council has done an incredible job, and during this second phase that is a vote counting process, we saw a very calm day. So there are still some moments left for this process where the armed forces will also be present. We have seen how the Electoral Council has displayed with technologies and also in other ways. Firstly, we would like to say that this process starts today on December 3rd. So, from this day on, the armed forces will be guarding the polling stations. And the armed forces continue to work on the streets. So we can continue this day calmly. So these armed forces will not only protect the voting stations, but they also will take these votes to the National Electoral Council. This is not only a job for the armed forces, also for firemen and other officials that have participated during this event. They have been guarding not only the polling stations, but also the equipment and the boxes that contain the votes. So every Venezuela can cast their votes, their constitutional right to vote. So we can say the armed forces are still guarding the streets and will continue to do so until this event ends, always providing security for the people and keeping everything safe for the people. We would also like to thank all the staff of the National Electoral Council and also the rest of the organizations that participated in this day. What we have to do now is wait, and we will be looking forward to that moment in the next few hours. So the people have spoken, and what comes next, it's to work to guarantee the well-being of Venezuela.
We were listening to the briefing by the High Plenary of the Security Forces of Venezuela. The Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino expressed the success of the security plan, Plan Republica, in developing of today's important referendum. He was also joined by other members, like the Minister of Citizen Security, Remigio Ceballos, who also reported the same. They congratulated all the men and women that were in charge of preserving peace and security during this referendum, and also congratulated the people that expressed an important show of discipline and democracy, as the authorities report that there were no negative incidents during the whole day. So this is an example of the successful democratic day that Venezuelans went to the polls to defend the Essequibo territory. Let's now return back to Caracas with Gladys Quesada. She continues to analyze with her guests the referendum.
Arrancado en falso. Yeah, Luis, thank you. And we retake and resume the dialogue with our guest this night, Diego Cerquera, who we were saying is an international analyst and also an expert on Venezuela issues. We were talking, Diego, regarding the Monroe Doctrine and its impact back then in the beginnings of, in the early moments of this territorial dispute over the Guyana Essequiba. But right now, when we are sadly marking the 200 years of this policy of the U.S., how do you see, how do you perceive the echoes of the Monroe Doctrine today, and specifically on the Guyana Essequiba?
Well, I think it's more than echoes, it's a resonance. I mean, it's clearly rhyming history one more time, because if you take into account when did, this was a more or less managed sleeping issue at some point, you know.
A dormant issue.
Dormant, which is a much more accurate word for it, correct. And when did it actually restart it, and when did it actually took such an aggressive drive? It was during 2015. That's when based on the new explorations by ExxonMobil, in the sea facade of the non-delimited areas of Venezuela, the coastline of Venezuela and Guyana. That's where actually, when these explorations learned how much oil and gas reserve are actually present there, and coincidentally, quote unquote, it happens the same year that Venezuela started to get sanctioned, and you had a conflict by proxy basically, and you had also a Guyanese government back then. I'm talking about the Grande government that was actually overtly hostile against Venezuela, and basically on the U.S. framework, the ExxonMobil framework, the ExxonMobil rationale on how to not even solve this, but to claim this territory without, ignoring specifically the international law. And then you had the goodwill process that was managed by the UN. That, sure, I mean, it was probably one of the worst times in Venezuela to actually deal with this situation when it has the internal conflict. So you have another rhyme right there, because you have the Brits doing this back in the 19th century, in a moment that actually Venezuela was going through a very long and complex civil war. And then you have the U.S. version of this going on precisely in a moment that Venezuela is being deeply disrupted and destabilized by the U.S., and this becomes like an extra tool inside the U.S. intervention toolbox against Venezuela. That's actually when the things got really bad and hostile, and that also set a very damaging tone on the relationships, the relations between Venezuela and between Caracas and Georgetown, basically.
And I want to stress, because we were talking this backstage in the recess moment.
Yes.
Guyana had other kind of relationships with Venezuela prior to this matter.
Historically, I mean, when they tried, there was this issue during the campaign. It was a spin by the usual suspects about saying that the Comandante Chavez actually just gave away the Essequibo issue, the Essequibo affair, and so on, which is not true. They actually managed it, but in very friendly terms, in such a way that actually they didn't make any actual noise. I mean, there was like an implicit agreement going on expecting the proper moment to finally settle this situation in a way that will be beneficial for both, which is actually the government position. The Venezuelan government, I mean, not the Guyanese government currently, not the elite government in this moment.
No, at all. And also, as we want to stress, the Venezuelan government, the Venezuelan authorities have been stressing today, even though today, the day of the referendum, that they want to dialogue with Guyana's authorities. They don't want a conflict.
It's fundamental, and well, of course, you could see how the meaning of this referenda already had an impact before even happening in some quarters of political positions that are actually more interested in the conflict than actually some sort of resolution, because a resolution would involve something not the opposite. I mean, a win-win situation probably instead of a zero-sum game, which is basically what the U.S. foreign policy is about, especially in the region, especially against Venezuela. So actually, it's quite tragic the role that right now the Guyanese government is playing, because things shouldn't be this way. I mean, Venezuela is in a position that it was mandatory basically to hedge the bets on where we stand, not only the Venezuelan government, the Venezuelan people.
Yeah.
And it's something that's been proven. And I'm not talking not even about, this is very wide in the political spectrum. It goes beyond Chavismo. This is not a Chavista claim, and has been proven during one of the most smoothest campaign we've ever had, political campaign, I mean. And this shows also the will to actually find a proper solution, a non-humiliating solution for neither party, not only for Venezuela, but also for the Guyanese. And there are off-ramps, there are possibilities, there are things that could be created in order to, make it a fair deal for both of us, without harming, first, neither sovereignty, neither Guyanese or Venezuelan, but and also specifically in this case the Essequibano population, the people from the Essequibo specifically, because we've been also accustomed to believe that no one's there.
No.
I mean, previously to the Bolivarian Revolution, when I studied in primary, the map, it was called the zona de reclamación, the conflict zone, the zone in discussion, the zone in dispute. Actually would be the proper word.
And there are communities in San Martin de Durumbac, for example, for instance.
All across, the Essequibo region. Yeah. It's funny how they didn't exist in these claims by the U.S. because basically they don't worry that much about the Essequibo by itself. They're worried about the oil reserves and the gas reserves offshore. And
they then, in that point, we return to the idea and the theory of creating the wasteland.
That's even, I mean, you're just like touching one of the deepest fiber of the liberal order, basically. Even John Locke, the Brit philosopher, always talked about Luberland, which was a land where all the white, lazy people should be expelled to. How did that translate into? That translates into what the U.S. origins. It's nothing but Locke by himself, but it's part of that tradition and how they conceive not only brown, black, indigenous people, but also their own people, the poor people in this case, not the white people specifically, the Irish or the poor people in England, and how they need to populate these other spaces. That actually it's part of the philosophical background and the explanation of the origins of the U.S. by itself, philosophically speaking. And it's the same thing exactly. You have to populate, you have to control, you have to
conquer and dominate. Finally.
And divide and rule. You have to. You have to, place a dividing line between neighbors in order to actually attain the more kind of revenue possible. And you also have finally a non-government entity, an extraterritorial entity, pulling the strings here, which is the ExxonMobil. So it's not even a national question if we focus on that angle.
Yeah. Okay, so Diego, time is not our ally here.
Yes, of course.
Live television, the issue.
Sure.
So I invite you for future emissions, for future conversations, for future dialogues.
Of course.
So
come in.
I'm going to take that into account. So right now we say goodbye to Diego and we give back the signal to Havana, but we will stay here to receive other guests. Back to you, Luis.
Thank you. 5 veces sí.
Thank you, Gladys. We continue with the analysis of this important consultative referendum in the defense of the Essequibo. And let's continue learning more about this territory The Essequibo has significant natural and energy resources, not only in its continental area, but also in the different zones, in the maritime zones that are being reclaimed. With important oil deposits in 2015, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana signed an agreement with the oil giant ExxonMobil for the extraction of crude oil, illegally we could say, in the high seas.
In December 2018, the vessel Ramford Tethys, contracted by the Transnational, was intercepted by the Venezuelan authorities on Saturday, December the 22nd, near the coast of Guyana, when it was carrying out seismic exploration works in the Stabroek Block. This area is part of the maritime territory claimed by Venezuela from Guyana, so the exploration activities were catalogued by the Venezuelan government as a violation of its sovereignty. From that moment on, tensions between the two countries flared up. The Lansfish 2 appraisal well in the Stabroek resulted in a significant discovery in which the corporation made an estimated finding of more than 11 billion barrels of oil and gas. In the disputed acreage, more than 200 kilometers from Guyana, ExxonMobil expects to produce more than 1.2 million barrels of oil and gas by 2027.
Malaria is a disease caused by Plasmodium parasites, potentially fatal and transmitted to humans through the bites of Anopheles mosquitoes. The people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana face the effects of this mosquito-borne disease.
In 2021, a total of 520,000 cases were reported in the American continent. The Cooperative Republic of Guyana is one of the countries with the highest rates of this serious infection, which requires treatment to prevent the death of the infected. The statistics recorded in the South American country indicated prevalence of this disease in regions that include the territory in dispute of the Guyana Essequiba. For example, in 2017, 24,400 cases and 33 deaths were reported. In 2020, the figure reached 22,159 infected and 28 deaths, while in 2021 there was an increase with 25,792 patients and 27 deaths. This situation points to the need to strengthen epidemiological and sanitary controls on zoonoses, diseases transmitted by animals which afflict the population of the Essequiba.
We'll continue to analyze every question of the 5 questions that are part of the referendum. So the second question of the consultative referendum, let's review what it means in the defense of the Guyana Essequiba. With more details, Madeleine Garcia.
What is the context that led to the formulation of the second question of the consultative referendum of December 3rd in defense of the Guyana Essequiba? We continue telling you in this teleSUR's special series. After signing the fraudulent 1899 Paris Award, one of the U.S. lawyers who defended Venezuela in the trial left a will, which he authorized it to be published after his death, confessing everything, the fraud. It was a pact between U.S. and the United Kingdom. I quote a part of will of Severo Mallet Prevost. The decision of the court was therefore unanimous, but also it is true that I gave Venezuela the most important sector in dispute from a strategic point of view. It was unfair to Venezuela and deprived of our very large and important territory over the Great Britain had not the slightest right. This is a critical testimony, so that in 1962, Venezuela denounced to the United Nations the fraud of the Paris Arbitration Award of 1899, which was and is null and void for Venezuela.
In 1966, the United Nations accepted our proposal to reach an agreement, forcing England and Guyana to negotiate, Guyana as the subsequent inheritor of the territory that we are claiming. But from 1962, England sat down with us for 4 years, which was an implicit recognition of the invalidity and nullity of the treaty, of the Paris arbitration, and therefore a new era started. What is Venezuela claiming? Let's sit down to negotiate in a practical and mutually convenient resolution for both sides.
The Geneva Agreement became the evidence of the felony. If the Paris Arbitration Award of 1899 had not been so fraudulent, the United Kingdom will never have signed it.
Yes, the 1899 arbitration award is not only null and void due to the nullity defects that took place during its negotiation and process, which we must remember also violated the disposition that had been agreed in the Treaty of Washington of 1897, but also because of signing an agreement by both sides in the city of Geneva precisely in February 1966. Even when British Guyana was under British colony, because they had already assumed not only the null and void character of this agreement, but also for the legal effects after the implementation of this agreement. Furthermore, the 1899 arbitration award was never executed, and therefore it was also ruled out. In fact, it was surprising how the International Court of Justice did not pronounce on the null and void nature of this 1899 arbitration site, which today Guyana intends to revitalize before the international legal instances, precisely because of its unfair and unenforceable nature.
Historically, the Geneva Agreement of 1966 is the only valid international legal instrument for Venezuela to solve the controversy through dialogue, which Guyana is now turning back on, perpetuating the history of dispossession by ex-colonizer. The reason? ExxonMobil's interest in the resources there, announced with bombs and fireworks in the marine territory that has yet to be demarcated. For Venezuela, dialogue is essential to solve the dispute and maintain peace in the region. For these reasons, Venezuelans are asked, do you support the Geneva Agreement of 1966 as the only valid legal instrument to reach practical and satisfactory solution for Venezuela and Guyana regarding the controversy over the territory of Guyana Essequiba? See you next time.
As we continue with a special program on the special day of the Consultative Referendum, let's continue breaking down the 5 questions that make up today's Consultative Referendum. The first question you will see right now in a moment on screen, there it is. It reads, do you agree to reject by all means, in accordance with the law, the line fraudulently interposed by the Paris Arbitration Award of 1899, which seeks to dispossess Venezuela or Guyana Essequiba? These were question answers to Venezuela's historical stance of not recognizing this arbitration award that pretty much cheated Venezuela from the agreement that they were trying to look to settle the dispute back then with the United Kingdom. The Empire of the United Kingdom that was the one that owned the region at that time, after they took it from Venezuela, because we must remember that when Venezuela was created as a nation, when it became independent from the Spanish, it was from the Essequibo to the west. And that region that today is in dispute belonged to them, that later on the British went on to carry on. So this to learn what the people's opinions is, what is their position. The second question, as we move to the second question, is in the case underscoring the importance of the Geneva Agreements in the settling of the dispute, that reads, do you support the 1966 Geneva Agreement as the only valid legal instrument to reach a practical and satisfactory solution for Venezuela and Guyana regarding dispute over territory of the Guyana Essequiba? This comes later, the Geneva Agreement, after documents came to light that the Paris Arbitration Award of 1899 was completely a fraud, that it was all pretty much a business, we could say a backroom business to benefit the United Kingdom that the US sponsored. And when all this information came to light in the late 40s, those are the documents that Venezuela has in their power to say that this arbitration award was completely fraudulent and that it could no longer be the method that settled the disputes. That's when they go to the UN, and after a few years, in 1966, this agreement is signed by the United Kingdom, Venezuela, and all the parties involved as the only instrument to settle the dispute in a negotiated manner that would be beneficial for both sides. So here we are going to, the government, Venezuela, the people will express their will as they back the government stance that the only way to solve this dispute is following what is signed on this 1966 Geneva Agreement. Moving on to the third question. Question number 3 focuses on the ICJ's, the International Court of Justice, jurisdiction over disputes. It says, do you agree with Venezuela's historical position on not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to solve the territorial dispute over the Guyana Essequiba? This question deals with what happened in 2018 specifically. That's when Guyana pretty much abandons the agreement unilaterally, which they are not supposed to do. They're not legally able to do because the 1966 agreement is binding. But unilaterally, Guyana abandons this agreement and goes to the ICJ to try to solve the dispute on the ICJ, which they cannot legally do, because in the 1966 agreement, anything that is done on this issue has to have the approval of both sides to take any action. So here, Venezuelans will express if they support that the government of Venezuela will never recognize the ICJs. Moving on to question 4. Question 4, which addresses Guyana's use of the maritime territory, which is still undelimited. The question asks, do you agree to oppose by all means, in accordance with the law, Guyana's attempt to unilaterally take possession of pending sea delimitation illegally in violation of international law? Well, in this question, the matter is pretty obvious. This is all part after the discovery of the large oil deposit by ExxonMobil, a U.S. oil transnational, one of the biggest oil companies, that, funny enough, early in the year 2000s, ExxonMobil was in Guyana and abandoned Guyana because they believed that the investment risks were too high because drilling, exploiting the natural resources of undelimited sea is illegal. It's not allowed until the dispute is settled. And they did not see worth the risk to do that in the early 2000s. But it all changes in 2015 with the discovery of large amounts of oil and gas deposits. And that's when ExxonMobil comes in and this whole process is set into motion that Guyana abandons the 1966 agreements. And this goes exactly to that, to see the will of the Venezuelan people on this regard and to protect that area that is still to be undelimited, that historically the proofs in history gives the reason to Venezuela. Moving on to question 5, is more thinking of the future, of what comes after, present and future of that region, and it is about, they're asking the Venezuelan population if they agree with the creation of the Guyana Essequiba state and the development of an accelerated plan for the comprehensive care of the current and future population of that territory, including, among others, the granting of Venezuelan citizenship and identity cards in accordance with the Geneva Agreement and international law, those incorporating said state to the map of the Venezuelan territory. The referendum in dispute over the Essequiba territory consisted of a question. Let's go over the context in more details of the third one. With more details, our correspondent Madeline Garcia.
What is known about the context of the third question of the consultative referendum that makes Guyana so uncomfortable that it asked the International Court of Justice to prohibit? In 2015, the U.S. oil company ExxonMobil announced the discovery of a world-famous oil field in the maritime territory pending to be delimited between Venezuela and Guyana. And why is it pending to be delimited? It is because until the territorial controversy is not resolved, the maritime limits cannot be known, and Guyana illegally granted licenses in that sea and went beyond.
All this territory is in dispute, but the sea here in the Atlantic is an area to be delimited. Neither they nor we can send ships there to start extracting oil or gas. It is not to be delimited. But not content with that, the corrupt politicians who run Guyana then publicly handed over oil concessions on the undeniable Venezuelan sea. In this sea, up to the coast of the Amacuro Delta.
That same year, Guyana forgot about the good official, that is to say the negotiator, the palabrero in the indigenous culture, who is the person leading the negotiation, a role established in the 1966 Geneva Agreement. After the discovery of that oil deposit, Guyana turned its back on dialogue.
At one point, ExxonMobil even withdrew from Guyana in the year 2000. The vice president of ExxonMobil argued that there were no legal guarantees because there was a dispute that until it was resolved, it was not pertinent to make those investments. Later, the findings were so great that they returned, and in 2015, they began to take steps to resolve the problem. This problem of guaranteeing and ensuring investments, but from the point of view of their own interest, and they come to the conclusion to go to the International Court of Justice. The movement began to take place in United Nations, in the political cabinet of the United Nations. They allocate $80 million to Guyana with the express purpose of pursuing that war instance, the United Nations. The Guyanese Minister of Natural Resources of 2017 confessed that he received the sum of money with the purpose of pressuring officials in institutions such as the United Nations.
In 2018, Guyana unilaterally sued before the International Court of Justice to challenge the validity of the fraudulent Paris arbitration award, and Venezuela denounced that ExxonMobil finances Guyana's lawsuit before the ICJ.
When Guyana in 2018 introduces the unilateral claim against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, it becomes part of the ipso facto recognition of the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. But until that moment, it had never manifested its interest in taking the controversy to the court. And there is another historical factor that we cannot ignore. The action of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was ill-advised because, in the opinion of many jurists, he overstepped his functions on the Geneva Agreement by choosing or supporting in one way or another this maneuver by Guyana to take the case to the court, without having consistently exhausted the mechanism foreseen for a peaceful resolution of the dispute.
All this will be asked to Venezuelan men and women. Do you agree with the historical position of Venezuela of not recognizing the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice to resolve the territorial dispute over the Guyana Essequiba? And this question also has Guyana very upset.
Vemos en una próxima entrega. Soy Madeleine García desde la línea de facto, detrás de mí, la Guyana Essequiba.
Let's continue with the analysis. We are going again with Gladys in Caracas to continue analyzing with her guests the importance of the referendum.
Thank you, Luis. And yes, we are here having these dialogues and offering this special coverage and analysis also on the main topic today in Venezuela, and that is the dispute and also the diplomatic solutions that Venezuela is seeking on the Guyana Essequiba region and all the controversy that surrounds this topic. For that end, and to that end, I receive Gladys Quesada. I said that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks.
Okay, who is an international analyst and who is also an expert and is going to talk to us on these topics and matters. Be welcome.
Thanks a lot. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Okay, it's great for us too. So we have been given, in other moments of these conversations with experts, we have been given a historical perspective of this matter. You know, the arbitrary award, the several topics, and maybe the top points of this dispute. But let's give a more contemporary approach. So today, 2023, in the end of 2023 also, the Guyana government, is presenting this denounces on Venezuela before the International Justice Court, or the Court of Justice, and is taking a hostile approach on the matter of this dispute. What do you have to say on the real reasons and the real who's and the real whys of this dispute and this approach?
Well, you know, it's important to recognize that in most parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, there are legacy colonial histories regarding borders. You know, most countries on the African continent, for instance, were not produced out of a normal historical process. They were a result of the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, where the European powers came in and drew boundary lines. That sets in motion the possibility of conflicts between countries, you know, because they don't have what you might think of a long process of developing their national boundaries. These were written or drawn by somebody else. Very similar in South America, where many of the boundaries were sketched by the interference of outside powers, whether it was the British during the high point of their imperial rule around the world, or the United States exercising its own sort of hallucinatory Monroe Doctrine and so on. So one of the issues in play is the fact of a colonial legacy, which we all have to deal with. The other one related to that is old boundaries and so on were drawn before issues such as sharing of resources, before issues such as, you know, who's going to control mines or oil fields and so on. These boundaries were often produced before that. They are anterior to it. You know, the disputes come later. In the case of the issue between, say, Guyana and Venezuela, these are fraternal peoples. These are peoples who've lived side by side for a very long time. Guyana is a product largely of British imperialism. You know, its peoples were all peoples largely brought there for the purposes of Britain's international plantation economy. There's a lot that unites the people of Guyana and the people of Venezuela. This is in fact not a dispute, in my opinion, between the peoples of Guyana and the peoples of Venezuela. It's an interesting dispute because this dispute is largely one that has been driven by one of the world's largest oil companies, and that's ExxonMobil. Last year made a profit of $56 billion. It's an extraordinary amount of money for one company to have made. ExxonMobil, before that Esso, Standard Oil, has had a long history of utilizing its own money power, but then its relationship to the US government, the full force of the US military, of the US diplomatic services and so on, to exercise its unnatural power over South America. And so this is more a conflict of the people of Venezuela and Guyana against ExxonMobil rather than a conflict between the people of Venezuela versus the people of Guyana.
Precisely, you were speaking of the military support that ExxonMobil is receiving, whereas directly or indirectly. And you know, there is an interesting fact. On December the 1st, just 2 days ago, when the International Court of Justice was about to hand out the sentence, the final word on this dispute, or one of the final words, the Southern Command handed over to Guyana's government a military hospital worth over $1 million. The same day they were granting another award, they were granting another gift to Guyana's government, which is the underbelly of this.
Well, you know, we know that the United States, using its military power, has for a long time tried to subdue countries in South America over things like resources, you know, oil and so on. The United States has attempted several times to overthrow the government, first of Hugo Chavez and then of Nicolas Maduro, using military force, you know, threatening, intimidating, bringing ships down across towards the Venezuelan waterline and so on. This is not something unusual. Before the government of Gustavo Petro in Colombia, the United States and the military, Southern Command, attempted to use the administrations, several administrations in Colombia against the Venezuelan government. So the use of military power by the United States is a pretty naked history. It's not something that is covert and you have to bring it out into the open. The ships actually, they come directly along the waterline.
Yeah.
The military bases in Colombia that used to be very active in threatening Venezuela, in the time before Gustavo Petro, this is something that is transparent. It doesn't need much analysis.
Precisely. The Southern Command exerted pressure on Venezuela during the administration of Iván Duque in Colombia and the administration of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. In fact, prior to the election, prior to the day of the election, he was present with the Southern Command, in a meeting with the Southern Command in Florida. So yeah, the Southern Command has implemented and orchestrated these pressure points on South American progressive governments and precisely on Venezuela. So this is not new. This is just one of the many, many pages of this book of attempts and plots and schemes against Venezuela and other progressive governments. So what can we expect regarding this consultative referendum, regarding this diplomatic way, this democratic, and because I have to say the referendum is democratic, is legal, is also constitutional. So those are three ways that this will of the Venezuelan people is manifesting. So what can come next and after that?
Well, it's important to recognize that the United States and ExxonMobil have assisted the current government in Guyana to fight and prosecute the case for their claim to that region. It's also interesting that the actual agreement between the government of Guyana and ExxonMobil is really, really bad for the Guyanese people. Because what that agreement says is that 75% of the profit of any oil sales will go to ExxonMobil, that the remainder 25%, only 50% goes to the government of Guyana, and ExxonMobil doesn't pay taxes to Guyana. So basically, this is ExxonMobil hiding behind the government of Guyana to put pressure and make profit from Venezuela. Guyana is actually not a beneficiary of this claim. The principal beneficiary of this claim is ExxonMobil. And I want to say something about ExxonMobil that's important. When Venezuela decided to renationalize oil, you see, Venezuela has an interesting history with the nationalization of oil. Perez first nationalizes oil in the 1970s and then privatizes oil for the most part in the 1990s. Hugo Chavez renationalizes the oil in 2007. And one of the companies that resisted the renationalization of oil was ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil, inclusive of ConocoPhillips, fought against the Venezuelan government and went to an arbitration panel. ExxonMobil demanded $10 billion from Venezuela as compensation for the renationalization. And in my view, ExxonMobil, unable to win against the Venezuelan government, the arbitration panel only gave ExxonMobil $1.6 billion, a little more than 10% of what they wanted. But as a consequence of that, ExxonMobil starts a pressure campaign via Guyana. It's a pretty interesting story. And one has to ask the Trump administration, for instance, which brought in the CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, to become the Secretary of State in the Trump administration. And Tillerson plays a key role in putting the pressure on via Guyana against Venezuela. So I really want to clarify this, that this is really not a conflict between Venezuela and the Guyanese people. This is decidedly a conflict between the Venezuelan and Guyanese people on one side and ExxonMobil on the other. Because even if Guyana, quote unquote, is able to consolidate control over that territory, The Guyanese people do not benefit from the deal.
I'm going to stop you there, Rihad, and we are going to retake the conversation in a second moment because now we have to take back the signal to Havana. So back to you, Luis, and I hope you'll be well and give me back the time later.
Thank you, Gladys, and of course we're going to continue getting in touch with you and with Gestoso in the future in Caracas to continue analyzing and going deeper in this special program as we break down on the important issues, the background and the relevance of the consultative referendum in the defense of the Essequibo territory as the Venezuelan people went to the polls and some continue to go to the polls to express their will and their opinions on this situation. We are going to now take a moment as the Venezuelan people mobilize to exercise their right to vote in this consultative referendum in defense of Guyana. Let's see how this referendum was held, what it was about.
The referendum is carried out under the full right based on Article 71 of the Constitution of Venezuela, which establishes the consultation in matters of special national importance. Therefore, the Venezuelan state authorities complied with the parliament's request and designed 5 questions related to Venezuela's right over the Guyana Essequiba, which citizens must answer with a yes or no. For the December 3rd election, the Electoral Authority set up 28,027 polling stations distributed in 15,857 voting centers in the 335 municipalities of the 24 federal entities. Some 84,227,000 table members are working in the referendum, assisting 20,694,124 eligible Venezuelans to vote. The Venezuelan people have the opportunity to decide, and as it is tradition, to carry out their vote in an automated way under the famous system called Herradura. And once in the voting machine, they press on the screen their option that affirmatively will grant the defense of the sovereign rights of Venezuela on the Essequibo.
We continue with our special program. Let's now return the signal to the special set with Jorge Gestoso, who is joined with another special guest to continue talking about the importance of the day.
Thanks very much, Luis. David Denny, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you also for inviting
David,
me.
you are from Barbados?
Yes, I'm from Barbados.
How close and why are you watching this referendum? What will be the importance for the Caribbean, for the region?
Well, my association in Barbados see this referendum as a very important referendum. It's a referendum that allowed the people of Venezuela in the Bolivarian movement to demonstrate against U.S. imperialism and also to demonstrate against the creating of a militarization zone in the Caribbean, where the Caribbean is an area where we have been speaking very loud about as an area for a zone of peace. Now, this referendum is for us is not a referendum against the Guyanese people, but it's a referendum to give the people of Venezuela an opportunity to speak out against U.S. imperialism and to speak out against the exploitation of the Guyanese people who are being exploited by Exxon Mobil in Guyana, because they're the ones who are benefiting, and the working class people in Guyana, they are not benefiting from this process. So for us, this referendum is a very, very important referendum, not only for the Venezuelan people, but for the people of the Caribbean region.
We have heard that from Guyana this morning was the message that the purpose of this referendum done today in Venezuela was to prepare for an invasion to Guyana in order to create misinformation, misleading, and fear. Do you think that, what is your reaction about that?
Well, I don't believe that the referendum is designed to create any fear in the Caribbean region in relation to an invasion by Venezuela. And as I mentioned earlier, I see the referendum as one that is very important for us in the Caribbean region. Because when you look back at our history in relation to the Petro-Caribbean Agreement, Venezuela offered Guyana the best deal in the Caribbean. And that is that Guyana was able to participate in a project with Venezuela that gave them an opportunity to use rice as a means to pay for fuel that would have benefited the Guyana economy.
The program Petro-Caribe.
The Petro-Caribbean program between Guyana and Venezuela. And for us in the region, that was very important because it helped the Guyanese economy. And for us, Venezuela is a sister country and a friendly nation that have helped most of the English-speaking Caribbeans through the Petro-Caribbean Agreement, and also in terms of working with Cuba to assist us with the IKEA program that give a lot of working class people in our region an opportunity to see again.
So you have witnessed today's referendum here. How was your sense of what you have seen in the streets along the 12 hours of the referendum?
I saw people in Venezuela prepared to defend our region. I see people in Venezuela prepared to stand in solidarity with each other and are prepared to support the referendum. So most of the persons that I have been speaking to in Venezuela, all of them have indicated to me that they are very supportive of the referendum and they're very supportive of peace and unity in our region. I haven't seen anybody in Venezuela expressing any form of anger against Guyanese working class people or against any of the people in the Caribbean region. What I saw was that people in Venezuela want to be able to live together with our Caribbean people and Venezuelan people so that we can all work together for the development of our region.
You've seen that in the past few days here, there was an event about the 200 years of the Monroe Doctrine, America for the Americans. Do you think that that doctrine is dead or alive and kicking?
It's alive and kicking because the United States of America at this present moment is doing everything possible to attack working class people and to rob them of their resources. When you look at the war in Ukraine, you can see the action from the United States of America. When you look at the war in the Gaza region between the Palestinian people and Israel, you can see the United States of America there again. When you look at the whole question relating to Haiti, you can see the United States, they're all over again. So that the United States of America is using its military might to take advantage of working class people and to rob them of their resources. So the doctrine is still there, alive.
So how you feel in Barbados about the relation between Venezuela and the Caribbean in general and Barbados in particular?
Well, I am very happy, to see that there are stronger relationships have been developing between Barbados and Venezuela because the government of Barbados made a statement sometime back that they too will be looking forward to participating in the Petro-Caribbean Agreement, which I think is a very good position by the government of Barbados. And I think that the government of Barbados is doing everything possible to develop a stronger working relationships with Venezuela, because at the present moment we also have the Conviesta, an airline from Venezuela, now traveling to Barbados and flying directly back to Venezuela. So I think these are areas where both governments are doing very good in terms of developing a relationship that will benefit working class people and the people of Barbados.
David Denny, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you also.
We were talking to David Denny, and we get back to you now.
Also very interesting analysis with David Denny, as we have been seeing throughout the program. If you're just tuning in with us, special coverage of the special referendum, of the consultative referendum that is being held still on this Sunday in Venezuela in the defense of the Essequibo. We have been analyzing the different aspects of what led to this referendum, that got us to this referendum. And all the guests have talked about the history and how the Monroe Doctrine is still active in today's present. And they will, all them that have been there in Caracas witnessing the referendum in person, they have all been astonished by the celebration, as Venezuela has us accustomed that voting in Venezuela is seen as a celebration, a moment of unity of the people to come out and express their will. We are going to go now again with Gladys, as she's going to continue analyzing the referendum day.
Thanks, Luis, and thanks for the time and also for the contact. We retake the dialogue with Vijad Prashda. We were speaking in the first segment on this dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, and we were also breaking down, I think, the main points and the main sidelines, the main ways that this dispute has been taking place. And also we were clarifying that this is not a dispute, this is in the whole sense of the concept, and it's not a direct conflict or hostilities between peoples, the Venezuelan people, the Guyanese people, that has a historical bounds of ties, of friendship, of fraternal nexus. And we were speaking about how ExxonMobil is actually pulling the strings behind all of this. And we will continue on that topic, Vijad.
Yeah, we're talking right now while in Qatar, in Doha, COP28 is going on. This is the conference of parties around the question of climate change. And, people looking at COP28 are surprised, although they shouldn't be, about the domination of major fossil fuel companies around the debate, the setting of the debate at COP28. One of those companies is ExxonMobil. What's really interesting is over the last 60 odd years, transnational or multinational corporations, particularly fossil fuel companies, have become more and more powerful. They've become powerful not only in terms of their business or commercial interests, but also in terms of their power over governments. This is not the case where it's just that, ExxonMobil is exerting power over a poor country, Guyana, 800,000 people, a poor country, a country with few internal resources and so on. ExxonMobil exercising authority over the country of Guyana. It's not just that. It's also that they exercise overwhelming control over their own governments. Interestingly, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, passed a big investment act, the IRA Act, where there was a lot of space for big companies like ExxonMobil to make a lot of money on things like carbon sequestration and so on. They are using climate change effectively to make profit. This is what is coming out of Doha, Qatar, where COP28 is taking place. But it's also in the case of this, border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, which is again not a dispute between the Venezuelan and Guyanese people, but it's a dispute imposed upon the region by another one of these giant companies, in this case ExxonMobil. What's really interesting is from the 1970s till 1992, the United Nations had an office in the UN Secretariat which monitored and tried to produce regulations against transnational corporations, multinational firms like ExxonMobil. Part of the concern is these companies are so powerful that they're able to subvert democracy. So, you know, you can have a democratic election, you can elect a government. The government is meant to be accountable to the people. But just look at what I said to you earlier about the deal struck by the Guyanese government with ExxonMobil. The deal is not good at all for the Guyanese people. This is the recolonization of Guyana. You know, Guyana has a great history of anti-colonial resistance. They fought the British in the 1940s. In 1951, Chedi Jagan leads the Guyanese people into independence. It was a glorious moment. The United States and Britain tried to overthrow the government of Chedi Jagan in 1953. Gunboats from Britain came and sat off the harbor in Georgetown and so on, put a lot of pressure on the government of Chedi Jagan. So it's not like the Guyanese people don't have a glorious history of fighting against external intervention, and yet the governments in recent years have cut deals with these corporations only because these corporations are getting increasingly and dangerously powerful, so powerful that they subvert democracy. If, for instance, the government of Guyana actually talked about the deal that it's made with ExxonMobil, talked about it amongst the Guyanese people, the Guyanese people would be distraught to hear that the precious resources under the ground, which, you know, are not really owned by anybody. This is just material lying under the ground. But who's going to take advantage of this? Not the people of Guyana, but ExxonMobil. And that's why I say that this is a conflict that ExxonMobil has imposed upon both the Venezuelan people by seizing that part of the territory of the northern half of South America, trying to seize that territory. They've imposed that conflict on the Venezuelan people, but they've also equally imposed a conflict on the Guyanese people because they're going to loot the Guyanese people of any possible profit. You know, business newspapers have been saying that as a consequence of all of this oil that's been found, Guyana's growth rate is going to double by 2027. Not true at all. The only growth rate that's going to double or triple is the profits made by ExxonMobil because it has found a way to get access to that oil. ExxonMobil has been angry with Venezuela since the expropriation in 2007. This is almost looking like a kind of revenge against the Venezuelan people. This claim laid on that oil is a revenge against the government of Hugo Chavez at the time for expropriating the assets of ExxonMobil, which were not really the assets of ExxonMobil, but were always the assets of the Venezuelan people. And so this is another example of the extraordinary power of these private multinational corporations, which are a threat not only to the people of Venezuela, but also to democracy in general.
And I wanted to make a point in here. We don't want to blame oil. We don't want to blame oil. We are following the money here. We are following the trace of oil exploitation, because back in another times under Hugo Chavez's government, when Commander Chavez was alive, Petrocaribe functioned, and Guyana was a part of Petrocaribe. And we were saying that with Diego Cerquera, they were trading under Petrocaribe, they had the facilities, they were cooperating. So oil was not the issue, was the people behind the oil. Is that true?
It's always about ownership. You know, look, people around the world have to collaborate more and more with each other. I was very interested over the last couple of years. There's been increased tension between India and China over the border, particularly the two regions of Ladakh in the northern part of India and in Arunachal Pradesh in the northeast. Increased tension between these two important Asian countries. And lots of commentators say, well, you know, they'll never be able to fix their border dispute. These border disputes are intractable. During this same period of time, Russia and China, which have had a long border dispute that goes back to the 1950s, because of the political will in Beijing and in Moscow, Russia and China were able to clear the deck and solve the border dispute, sign a declaration that they agreed on the delimitation of the border. You know, people need to be able to sit down and have reasonable conversations with political will to solve these kinds of disputes. The problem here is not the governments as such, but it's how these very powerful multinational corporations have come in and insinuated themselves, taken advantage of these minor disputes that could be resolved. It's the old Roman formula of divide and conquer. If you divide people, you're able to take advantage of their differences and assert yourself as a powerful entity. And that's exactly what ExxonMobil is doing. Once again, to reiterate what you're saying, it's not a question of oil. This could be any commodity. You know, this might have been, for instance, the discovery of gold. It could be agricultural land.
Uranium.
It could be uranium, could be lithium, could be any other commodity of importance.
Yes.
It happens to be oil. It could be natural gas, but this happens to be oil. And it's not a coincidence that it's ExxonMobil in Guyana and ExxonMobil in Venezuela that's creating the problems, because this goes right back to 2007 and the expropriation of ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil has an ugly, ugly global history of operating. It keeps getting into trouble for the things that it does in countries around the world, including participating in violence against people who are unhappy with pipelines and so on. But also, it is absolutely guilty of a number of crimes of effectively externalizing the costs of production of oil, allowing oil spills, not maintaining pipelines and so on. ExxonMobil is a scofflaw. It routinely violates international laws. So it's interesting here that ExxonMobil is taking advantage of the existence of arbitration panels and so on, taking advantage of the law to get its way. In fact, why should we allow these major scofflaws, these people who disregard laws when it comes to their operations, why should we allow them to use the law to get their way when they are otherwise unable to politically? Politically, the people don't want to give 75% of the profits of the oil to a company like ExxonMobil. That's a political decision. And it was a very bad decision made by the Guyanese government. Politically, it should be clear to people. So why should we now allow them to use legal instruments and the immense money power they have to manipulate legal instruments for their benefit? You know, they use this money power inside national jurisdictions, and now increasingly they are using it in international jurisdictions to try to influence international arbitration panels to their benefit. They are, in fact, in this case, and I'm sorry to say this because I have great affection for the Guyanese people and the Guyanese process, but in this case, they are using money power to effectively pay for the Guyanese government to go into international arbitration against Venezuela. The bill for that arbitration is not being paid by the government of Guyana, it's being paid on their behalf by ExxonMobil. And that's another example of how these massive multinational corporations are destroying democracy and the international system.
Thanks you, and thanks for your criteria and your opinion, Villad. And we will be glad to receive you in other moments, but for now we have to close our dialogue here.
Thanks a lot.
So as you were hearing, it's not a matter of commodities, it's not a matter of oil, it's a matter of who pulls the strings behind every situation, behind every conflict. So now we give back the signal to Havana, but prior to that, I will be inviting you to follow this special coverage, this special programming on this day of the referendum on the Guyana Essequiba region. Back to you.
Thank you, Gladys. Very interesting talks that we have sustained with different guests that both Gladys and Jorge have had with the different guests that we had on this special show. We're talking about the consultative referendum in the defense of the Essequibo that is held today, Sunday, December 3rd, in Venezuela, in the whole nation, in the whole national territory, as the people come out and express the vote. So far into the night, we have heard statements from the president of the National Assembly of Venezuela, Jorge Rodriguez, who came out and expressed his satisfaction, the satisfaction of all the authorities of the development of this referendum, and thanked the Venezuelan people for the show of democracy and discipline, of civil discipline, as everyone came out to vote and express their opinion, their will, in an exciting manner, in a part of celebration in peace and prosperity in defense of the homeland. We also heard later from the defense minister, Vladimir Padrino, that expressed the success of the Plan República and that everything was moved according to the plan and that no negative incidents were reported. Talking throughout the day, if you're just tuning in to our special program that will continue, we have talked with different guests and they have all expressed their opinions, of course, and putting emphasis on the source of these disputes, which is not something that began recently, it's something that goes back over a century, and the origin is right there in the colonial times, in the colonial policies of the British Empire of the time, and how they continue to have repercussions today. That repercussion today, not from a foreign empire, but from a private company. These powerful private companies, transnationals, that have grown so much in power, that are deciding on the fate of the countries. Different analysts and different people on the streets and different occasions, different settings, they have expressed that this is, of course, not an issue between Venezuelan people and the people of Guyana. The people of Venezuela and the people of Guyana, for a very long time, over the decades, have had favorable relations, brotherly relations, until the intervention of ExxonMobil after 2015 with the discovery of the oil fields, that the relations are strained. Before this has something that has to be left very clearly. This is not a confrontation between Venezuela and Guyana. It's more the influence of this U.S. oil giant that wants to pluck away and continue with the plundering that has been happening, unfortunately, during the decades of Venezuelan resources. This was done previously first through Colombia before the Petro administration came into power. The previous administrations that Colombia had supported the U.S. South Command to try to, let's say, topple democracy in Venezuela, to try to bring a change in government. And now this is just a new scenario that is opening up with the influence of ExxonMobil in Guyana and the U.S. Southern Command that recently, in the past couple of years, have begun military exercises in Guyana with the U.S. Southern Command, which, of course, is a source of issues, of problems, of concern for the security of Venezuela. What is happening today is the Venezuelan people coming out to express their will to protect their homeland, because different Venezuelan authorities have expressed over time, this is a historical truth that Venezuela has always defended. If we go all the way back in time, over 100 years ago, back when Venezuela had become independent, and after the early 1800s that the British took over from the Dutch the region of Guyana, is when the British start moving, they're expanding from the east towards the west, from the Essequibo, to appropriate from all these gold resources that were there, and they steal the land from the Venezuelan nation that was born then. We are seeing images live on the screen of the National Electoral Council. We believe that very soon, Elvis Amoroso will be providing statements on this important referendum. Let's listen.
Representantes de los partidos políticos, de distintas organizaciones.
representative of different organizations, some people that have visited us from different regions. We would like to thank them all for being here with us during this day. This is a document that we present to the Venezuelan people today on December 3rd, which is a very important date for the Venezuelan people, especially for those who went to the voting stations. The Electoral Council informed that the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is free and independent and defending its patrimony, peace, and rights is today trying to state, first of all, the constitutional right of voting in its fifth article, that the people that is exercising directly its right to vote and these people are able to exercise this constitutional right through the voting stations. This is an example of social sovereignty. And every person in political organizations are obliged to comply with everything that the Constitution states. In this year, the National Assembly approved to ask for the Electoral Council to hold this referendum regarding the dispute of the Essequiba territory. So we are here gathered with the staff of the National Electoral Council to approve this document by the National Electoral Council. On October 23rd, in 2023, it was approved unanimously by the Electoral Council 5 questions that would be directed to the Venezuelan people. The first of these questions was that, do you agree, by all means, reject the fraudulent delimitation this delimitation pretends to steal the Essequiba territory from Venezuela, and 99% of the population in Venezuela answered yes to this question. Only 0.2% of the population answered no to this question. Regarding the second question about the Geneva Agreement in 1996 as the only instrument for Venezuela and Guyana to deal with the dispute of the Essequiba territory, 98% of Venezuelans answered yes to this question. Only 1.8% of the population answered no. In the third question about not recognizing the International Court of Justice choice about the delimitation of the Essequiba territory. To this question, only 4.10% answered no to that question. The rest of the population answered yes. And by all means, do you agree to oppose the Guyana's appropriance of the sea territory? 95% of the population answered yes to this question, and 4% answered no to this question. And the last question, do you agree with the creation of Guyana's government to develop a plan to attend the population of this territory and granting people from this territory Venezuelan identification for the people who live in the Essequiba? As it is stated that Essequiba is part of the Venezuelan territory, and 95% of the population answered yes to this question. And only 4.7% of the population answered no to this. So we can say that this is a great victory for yes. The National Electoral Council, by democratic means in the Democratic Republic of Venezuela, congratulates voters for their participation, for this great participation, for this Essequibo event, which has marked a landmark in the Venezuelan history. Therefore, we inform So we would like to inform that over 10 million people participating today in this referendum, and most of them, the great majority of these people, answered yes to these questions, and these numbers will increase gradually, taking into account there are still some voting stations that are still counting votes. Thanks to the Venezuelan people to come to these voting stations and cast their votes, to vote united, and therefore Elvis Amoroso, President of the National Council, we would also like to thank Rosalba Hill. We would also like to thank Juan Carlos Pino, and also Conrado Pérez, Ana Rosa Hernández, Antonieta Stefano, and Ana Julia Niño. Also, Mr. Vizcaíno Hill. We would also like to thank Tulio Ramirez, General Secretary. And from here, we would like to thank all the Venezuelan people for this successful day. We would also like to thank the armed forces and our securities staff that provided a very calm day at the voting stations. We would also like to thank all the organizations that participated today, all of those who supported this important event. And most importantly, we would like to thank the staff of the National Electoral Council and, of course, our beloved people in Venezuela, who are showing once again that we have the best electoral system in the world. Thank you very much. Tomorrow,
So we were listening to the statements of the National Electoral Council of Venezuela. The authorities defended the legality and constitutionality of Sunday's historical consultative referendum. The authorities announced the landslide victory of the yes option in this consultative referendum. The images that we're seeing right now live are from Venezuela. We're seeing images of the president of the Bolivarian Republic, Nicolás Maduro, arriving to a place of celebration as the citizens celebrate this landslide victory of the Venezuelan people that decided to come out and vote in defense of the Essequibo, of the homeland, and the sovereignty of the nation. If we go over very quickly over the results, the first question so far, remember this is not the final tally because the voting schedule was extended for a couple of more hours. But these are very definite results of the will of the Venezuelans. The first question that dealt with the rejection of the arbitral award of 1899, the yes option got 97.83%, an overwhelming majority of the support of the Venezuelan people of every sector of life, of all walks of life, of different political beliefs, that they reject this arbitral award of 1899. The second question that was that if they believe that if they supported that the Geneva Agreement of 1966 was the only way, the only valid option to settle the dispute, got 98.11% for the yes, another overwhelming victory for the yes option. The third question that was about if they rejected, if they did not recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ, 95.40% of support for the yes. The fourth question that dealt with the rejection, with the condemnation of the appropriation by ExxonMobil through Guyana of the oil fields in the sea that expanded the limitation, got 95.94% for the yes. And the final question that dealt with the creation of the Guyana Essequiba state also was an overwhelming victory for the yes option with 95.93%. So far, 10.5 million people, more than 10.5 million people, voted in this historical referendum for the defense of the Essequibo. We must remember this voter turnout is not the final one because people are still voting in different polling stations because the voting time was extended for a couple of hours, and these numbers will be known later on, probably tomorrow. But the overwhelming victory is a reality. It's there, the results are there, and the Venezuelan people have come together jointly, in harmony, in peace, to protect their homeland, to protect their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, and they came out in the defense of the Guyana Essequiba, that territory that for a very long time has been disputed, and the origin came from the colonial policies of the British Empire and now the expansionist policies of the oil company ExxonMobil. Let's listen a bit to the celebrations as the people are celebrating to the song that was the anthem of this campaign for this referendum.
Forma parte de Mina. ¿Y cómo dice el corito? Vota 5. Con la manito arriba, arriba, arriba. 5 veces 5. Vota 5 veces. 5 veces 5. Vota 5 veces. 5 veces sí. Vota 5 veces. Vota 5. Vamos, hermanos, a protegerlo. porque somos venezolanos y unidos nos damos la mano. Lo lograremos, porque el destino de Venezuela está bendito, nos pertenece y está escrito. Es imposible borrar de tu corazón algo que siempre fue tuyo. Oh, así con eso. Por nuestros niños y el futuro de la gente lo gritamos. ¡Ustedes durísimo! El Essequibo es nuestro. ¡Que se escuchan el Essequibo! Es nuestro. Así como nuestra bandera, el tricolor es Venezuela. El Essequibo es nuestro. El Essequibo es nuestro. No es zona en reclamación, forma parte de mi nación. Otra vez. Vota 5 veces. Allá atrás. Vota 5 veces. Aquí. 5 veces sí. Vota 5 veces. 5 veces sí. Vota 5 veces. Sí. Vota 5 veces. ¡Caracas, una bullita! ¡Sube la bandera! El Essequibo es nuestro. ¡Usted!
So to the ribbon of both five-time yes, the Venezuelan people are celebrating together with the head of state, Nicolás Maduro, the landslide victory of the yes option for defense of the Essequibo territory. This is a moment of joy and celebration as we are seeing the images that are surely replicated all over the national territory as they learn of the results, the very overwhelming victory of the yes option in defense of the Guyana Essequiba territory. And that's how the Venezuelan people decide their will, their future. Venezuela is a nation that is no stranger to come out and vote for the policies that will define their future. This is the 7th referendum and the 30th vote in over 24 years. I don't know if any country can say the same, but Venezuela has had a history of always celebrating their democracy and coming out to defend what is rightfully theirs. Let's listen to the national anthem of Venezuela.
Bolívar, padre Bolívar, lo hemos visto, Bolívar. Y un poco le pregunté en silencio, orando, aquella pregunta de Neruda, padre, ¿eres tú? Y me respondió el mismo Neruda, desde el corazón, sí soy yo, pero despierto cada 100 años, cuando despierta el pueblo.
Continue with the celebrations of the landslide victory of Venezuela. Let's listen to the statements of the President of the Republic.
We have to thank to Venezuelan people in general, women, men, children, all of them who have participated today. This event was for a national cause. So we are giving the first steps of a new stage in our history, so we can fight for what is ours, so we can recover what our heroes have left for us. The Venezuelan people have spoken loud and clear, and this victory belongs to the Venezuelan people, with no discriminations, with no specific political parties. So we have started a new way for national unity, so we have to stay united for the homeland, for Venezuela's future. What we saw today in this historic referendum, we have to stay united to fight for our territory, for our Guyana Essequiba, so we can fight for peace. This has been a wonderful day, and since September 21st, the National Assembly answered to the negative actions of the ExxonMobil and Guyana's government. So they thought they could take advantage of our maritime territory. This territory, both land and sea, are pending the limitations. This is something that has been controversial for many years. And the United States have settled military bases in this territory, threatening our land. I would like to thank the staff of the National Electoral Council for the work that they have done so far and for paving the way so we can enjoy the diversity we have in our country. And by making this referendum, so we can choose, our people can choose what will be the next step regarding this problem regarding Guyana and ExxonMobil. They have paved the way for this. And tonight, here in Caracas, in this Christmas time, we should hug each other, all Venezuelans. We should hug ourselves as a family, as the only family that we are. We have to acknowledge the work that the Electoral Council, all the staff in different organizations that have done an outstanding job, an outstanding work to keep the people informed, for showing us how the electoral process was going during the whole day, during the whole process. And the ExxonMobil and the United States have tried through different ways to intervene with this constitutional right that we have to make this referendum. They tried to buy politics of the right political parties in Venezuela. And however, we managed to succeed this event, and we have other plans that we will know in the next few days. We have a conviction. This conviction is to see the faces of Venezuelans and manage to mobilize the whole people to see them participate in this important event. We see that the Venezuelan people in the referendum will stay and they will support this by all means. We have succeeded today. This was a landslide victory. All the Venezuelan people said yes. In each question, with a high participation from our people. I had to explain, especially this morning at 6 a.m. when I had my coffee. Every time we have a challenge, we do this and have our coffee mixed from different parts. This is a great nature. We drank this coffee and went to the boat station to cast our boats. And in 15 seconds, this machine analyzed our boats and 5 times yes for each of the questions of this referendum. We have heard that the musician Bad Bunny is looking forward to record this song with us. We can say that Venezuela won today. We have an electoral system. This electoral system that we have, we Venezuelans are used to having this kind of process, which is reliable. It's easy to manage. Being this our complicated referendum with 5 questions regarding a dispute that has been going on for over 200 years. And you should see the faces of the people who are watching us in teleSUR and the other social networks. You should see the faces once they realize that we're doing a referendum, a complicated referendum with 5 questions, and our people have participated and have answered these questions, showing that we have a people, Venezuelan people, with high educational level. Therefore, we should thank and congratulate the National Electoral Council and every person that made possible this day. We should also thank the armed forces, police officers, this is a representation of the unity between the armed forces and the people. We send greetings to all social movements, to every organization, especially to women in our country, mothers, grandmothers. We would also like to thank youngsters in Venezuela. We also send greetings to workers' social movements and the working class, taxi drivers who also made possible this day. We would like to thank the whole transportation workers and movements, and especially to artists. We would like to thank artists, especially singers, who have visited 24 cities singing songs about the Essequibo. We would also should congratulate people who have participated in sports events representing Venezuela. We should also thank some of Venezuela movement. We also salute 5x5 movement. We also congratulate and thank to all the leaders who supported this day. We would also like to salute all the people that have made possible to raise the voices of Venezuelan people. We would also like to thank the community leaders of each city and region. We would also like to salute the elders of our citizens. We would also salute social movements and people with physical disabilities who also participate in this event. We would like to thank all of them. We would also like to thank entrepreneurs. And we would also send greetings to all religions in our country. Right here, yesterday, we did a religious meeting. And we prayed for everything to go well today. And we're receiving today is a great participation. Thank God. We are happy that we had this positive movement today. We would like to greet all the religious community in our country, Muslim, Christians, and African religion, Latin American religions, all of them, each one of them. We would like to thank them. I would also like to thank mayors and each person that, from a political point of view, supported the Essequibo and supported the Venezuelan people. I also have to say that I acknowledge how brave our leaders and how people from other political parties supported this referendum today in spite of the political preferences. National unity is gaining strength today. I would also like to salute the disciplined people, the working people who have dedicated their lives to the Venezuelan people. We would like to thank the staff of Venezuela Toda. I would like to thank Diosdado Cabello.
La juventud, Vanessa Montero, la juventud, América Pérez, Ilenia Medina, pura mujer, Gustavo Villapol y Héctor Rodríguez. Pedro Infante, ya lo nombré. Vamos a dar un aplauso a este equipo de gente trabajadora, disciplinada, creativa.
These people, these disciplined, intelligent people made possible this day. We are a team, and working as a team, only working as a team we can assure the victory. I would like to thank for the effort, dedication of all of you. I would also like to thank the Mayor of Caracas. This woman is it's a person which is very knowledgeable about this Essequiba dispute. And she was very excited to see how this topic has reached such a great magnitude. I would also like to thank General Pompeyo Torreal, a person who has investigated and have made proposals about this Essequiba dispute. We are a great team. And we have just given the first steps. And this very important first step that we have given it along with the people. And we are very acknowledgeable the work that they have made especially when we won against Guyana in front of the International Court of Justice. And teleSUR also witnessed how 5 times we have won. We have given a very important step to initiate a new stage, a new time in our history. This is a very important time. And we saw how President Chavez worked in this dispute with Guyana's government. But the situation from 2015 till now, we made an effort to explain the different stages that we have gone through. We have stated that here is where Venezuela was born. And the second stage was a stage in the 1800s, where the United States and the Monroe Doctrine, along with the British Empire, managed to illegally take control of this territory. And the third stage was a very difficult and complex process. In 1966, the Geneva Agreement was signed. And the second question of this agreement, and this second question of our referendum, was the question that had the most participation. And from 1966 to 2015, in the last stage, from 2015 to today, we saw that the ExxonMobil managed to buy a whole country. Just yesterday, there was a report that came to light that portrayed the income that the ExxonMobil has made so far. And they have made millions, $22,000 million. And of all of that, the Guyana government only saw $3 million. And we can say that could be easily stated that Guyana sell themselves to the United States. They sell themselves to the ExxonMobil. So we have to take a new step. We were going to do that with a few people, or maybe just one person. And this was something that could have been done by a few people, but we have to do this with democratic votes, counting on the people of Venezuela, all of you, to initiate a new stage. In this new stage, Venezuelan people can cast their votes and exercise their constitutional right. This is not the first referendum. We can say that this is the first referendum here in Venezuela. We have been surviving to what is called the Fourth Republic. I can say that in this referendum has marked a landmark on Venezuela's history, where the Venezuelan people were the main character in this story. And the Venezuelan people is the real winner in this story. And the people who have lost is the United States government, the Guyana's government, and the ExxonMobil. This is the truth. We can say that this is difficult regarding the political view of this referendum. And here in Caracas, are any people from Caracas here? This is a very important lesson from the sociopolitical point of view. This is an atypical movement because this is not a party against the other. For instance, the referendum in 2004 had a participation of about 70% of the population. And President Chavez, at the time, won this referendum with about 60% of the population. And here, the other side was in Guyana, United States. There were some right party people that was raising their voices trying to confuse people in Venezuela, but they couldn't. We have seen here that they did not succeed. We are seeing the awakening of the Venezuelan people. We should be proud of the times that we're living in, because we are making history. And in 150 years, this is a turning point in our history regarding the Guyana Essequiba. Today, the Venezuelan people spoke loud and clear. We are raising the voice of the people. And I can say, as a citizen, I can say, as a working man, raised and born here in Caracas, who is now president by the reasons that you all know. We have learned together in the last 10 years. They have underestimated us. Leave them alone. We will face all of these people because we're people who are brave and we work and we will give our lives for Venezuela. We are here meeting each other in a campaign and leaving aside all the conflicts, the negative conflicts that may have a negative effect, all the hate and the division that existed, especially during the 19th century, when the British came here and almost managed to control the Orinoco. And there were a few people fighting against each other. It's when they tried to do coup d'etats several times in different years. And then the ExxonMobil tried to advance in our territory, in our seas. They did not take into account the Geneva Agreement. And thanks to you, we are here today. Thanks to you that are here united. And thanks to you, we are seeing that now a new concept is being born. What people here want is unity, is to work. People do not want more conflict, division, or hate, intolerance. That's why what we saw today. For several years, we were disputing this, and what we saw today, that today all the political, cultural, economic sectors were united today and gave a very important step. And I tell you from this square here in Caracas that we are engaged to take forward this process of uniting the Venezuelan people so we can work together for Venezuela, for our interest. And we should head ourselves to that direction. We're going together for national unity. And here in this square, which was the biggest square in Caracas, you see that balcony over there? Right there. These people of mixed races, they managed to kick out the Spanish leader that they had at the time. We are in a very historic place. And in that way was born a new republic here in Caracas. A brave country. And here was born the greatest and the person who represents all of us. Our hero, Simón Bolívar. And because of him, we will rescue our territory in Guyana Essequiba. Long live the Venezuelan people, long live this referendum. And we will hear a song. I've been hearing a song. A very popular song that was written for the artists. I'm inviting you to participate and see this program tomorrow. I also invite you to participate not only physically but also through social media and in TikTok too. And WhatsApp. Who is using Instagram and X and Facebook, and also who has Telegram. We are happy. Venezuelan people are happy. Thank you very much, President, for giving me the opportunity to salute the Venezuelan people. We have always trust in the wisdom of the Venezuelan people, who have always accompanied us throughout the most difficult moments. And we were just remembering how painful was the loss of our leader. We are hearing the Venezuelan people who is saying today that we'll always fight for our sovereignty and for independence. 5 times yes, 5 yeses for the future of our homeland. We saw people crying today while they were voting. They were voting convinced. They had no doubts that we have to fight for our Guyana Essequiba. And now we have all Venezuela united, as it should be. And now we would listen to a woman. Today was a victory for yes. Thank you, President. It's an honor for me and for us as a people. We know that today, on December 3rd, is a new beginning for Venezuela and for the Venezuelan people. And this new stage of our history includes our Guyana Essequiba in our territory. Thank you very much to the Venezuelan people and to the President. And now we'll give the floor to Héctor Rodríguez. And we have just heard that right now, 11:15 p.m., there are still voting stations that are open. There are still people voting. we have not only seen the landslide victory at the yes, but we also have seen that the differences and fights within people is something natural. That's something natural, but what is not normal, what is not natural, is using hate and manipulation. And we're doing what's natural, what's normal, to start a dialogue, to communicate with each other. And that's what we have done today. Venezuelans have responded to this referendum, to new policies, to a new way to make politics in Venezuela. We have also gained sovereignty independence today. God bless you all, and thank you very much for this great victory. And right now we would listen to another woman. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the Venezuelan people, men, women, and children, that we saw during the campaign how they also were supporting this Essequibo. And these kids encourage their relatives to participate. We first saw this in our campaigns, and now we saw it today in the voting stations. And we have been seeing during the whole day the Venezuelan people expressing themselves. We saw people from all ages, and all of them were talking about the Essequibo because they knew what they were doing and what they were defending. They knew that they were guaranteeing the future for their younger generations, for their children and great children. And that's why we saw over 10 million people that voted for yes. And the Essequibo was ours and will still be ours for the next centuries. I would also like to thank to all television companies and means of communications that have made possible this day. All of them did a great job. All of them without exception. All of them, and also radio stations and teleSUR. And I would also like to listen a very important message from a person that also didn't stand the job. Thank you very much, President, for this great historic opportunity that you have given to these people to defend their future. Perhaps we cannot realize yet that this was the most important electoral victory in the Republic of Venezuela. Never before in Venezuela history, nor in any kind of elections or referendums or anything else, we have never seen 98% of participation in votes. What we see here is anonymity for these people to come to the voting stations and vote excited and say yes for a future, for a territory, and stating that the Guyana Essequiba will be ours forever. And now, we will go to celebrate. Some people are heading home, but some others are going to celebrate. We are seeing the victory of the Essequibo.
We were listening to the statements of President Nicolas Maduro, who said that this landslide victory marked a new moment, a new beginning in Venezuela's fight to recover what historically and rightfully belongs to Venezuela. Maduro called for the unity of the entire Venezuelan society, of all sectors of life, and to continue uniting, to continue fighting for the sovereignty of the homeland. He also praised the work of the National Electoral Council and of all the organizations and people involved in the development of this referendum, and praised their success in the work that they carried out. He also took a moment to denounce the U.S. and ExxonMobil actions that try to prevent the correct functioning, the holding of this referendum, and also gave a little bit of heads up that in the coming days they will be revealing other attempts by the U.S. and ExxonMobil and other ally members that try to prevent the referendum from taking place, a victory in this referendum that Maduro described as a glorious victory of the Venezuelan people against imperialism. Those were the statements, the summary of the statements of the President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela as the nation jointly celebrates the landslide victory of the yes option during this historical referendum that was held on December 3rd in Venezuela all over the national territory to protect the sovereignty of the country and the national integrity as they defend the long claim territory of Guyana Essequiba, and territory that was appropriated by the United Kingdom back in the late 1800s. Let's go over the results of the referendum that were announced earlier by the National Electoral Conference. Results are overwhelmingly positively and mark a great victory of the Venezuelan people in the defense of their sovereignty. The first question got 97.83% of the yes vote. The first question that dealt with asking if the people rejected the arbitral award of 1899. With a overwhelming majority, the people of Venezuela said yes, that they reject that arbitral award of 1899. The second question, and this is one of the most astonishing because this marked a new milestone in Venezuelan history, because the second question that dealt if you agree, the Venezuelan people agreed that the 1966 Geneva Agreement was the only path to follow to settle the dispute of the Guyana Essequiba. For the first time in Venezuela's history, more than 98%, a total of 98.11%, voted yes. This had never happened in the history of Venezuela. Never before during a referendum, an option that was being consulted had won more than 98% of the votes. The third question relating to the jurisdiction of the ICJ, the Venezuelans that voted yes, 95.40%, rejecting the jurisdiction of the ICJ on the disputes. The fourth question that dealt with the actions of ExxonMobil to exploit the oil in the sea that is pending delimitation in this disputed area also voted yes overwhelmingly with 95.94% of the votes. And the fifth question that is about the the creation of the Guyana Essequiba state and the granting of all legal rights and Venezuelan citizenship to the people who live there and guaranteeing the future, the human rights of everyone in this area, also got an overwhelming yes with 95.93%. An overwhelming victory is not a word to describe it. It's a clear landslide of the will of the people to protect their democracy and for Venezuela to recover what is rightfully theirs. Of course, always, as Maduro has said, and all the Venezuelan authorities, and that's something that has been repeated over during all this period, that always through the path of diplomacy, of dialogue, of peace. Something that from the Guyana side, from the other medias, they have been putting a discourse of aggression, and this is something that has to be cleared out. Venezuela in not a single moment has expressed any will of aggression against Guyana. This is always following the path of dialogue, of negotiation, as established in the 1966 Geneva Agreement, which is the only path that Venezuela recognizes for finding a solution to the dispute of the Guyana Essequiba. Let's continue with the analysis of this important day, of this important victory, and to continue talking about this day and following the results, we welcome Danny Shaw, Professor of International Studies at the Public University of New York. Hello, Danny. Welcome to our special program. Danny, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing?
I find Danny here celebrating alongside our Venezuelan compatriot the landslide victory that they reached in this referendum. Danny, to begin our exchange here, our conversation in this special program, how do you describe, how do you see the developing, the holding of this referendum, and now that we know the results, what they represent?
This is an important demonstration of Venezuelan unity before the ongoing hostility of the U.S. government and of private capital that wants a slice of this extremely rich Essequibo region. The Venezuelan people and their Bolivarian leadership do not have any beef with their neighbors in Guyana. Their beef is with ExxonMobil and these corporations who for decades now and centuries have sought to divide and conquer in order to control one of the most mineral-rich and gas and oil-rich regions in the entire world, and that is South America. So to see this resounding show of unity is certainly significant. I think we have to contextualize this latest U.S. proxy. It's not a proxy war, but certainly it's a proxy informational war using Guyana. We have to contextualize it because Brazil has gone left last year with the victory of Lula over Bolsonaro and over fascism. And look at Colombia. Colombia has historically been the largest U.S. base in the region, more than 9 U.S. bases in Colombia. And they haven't been able to weaponize Colombia and Brazil in the same way. So now they're trying to weaponize Guyana.
Danny, seeing the will of the Venezuelan people that came out peacefully to vote, and as you were saying, the discourse from the Guyana side, they have played the part of a victim that they feel they're going to be invaded, they're going to be attacked by Venezuela. But this has been a stance that has been clearly defended by the Venezuelan authorities, that the situation, the dispute has to be resolved through the 1966 Geneva Agreement, only through dialogue and negotiations to settle this peacefully. There's never been an expression of aggression against Guyana. So what is the intention of Guyana acting as the victim in this role?
That's because Laura Richardson and the U.S. Southern Command, as well as the Germans and the imperialists of yesteryear who continue to want to devour the Essequibo region for their own self-interest and all of Venezuela and all of South America. This vote shows that the Venezuelan people are standing firm in defense of their national interests. What a shame that President Irfan Ali in Guyana. The Guyanese people are a proud people with a long history of anti-imperialist struggle, from President Chetty Jagan to Dr. Walter Rodney, and of course the slave rebellions and in centuries past. I think the Guyanese people can also see that they are being used by the imperialist powers with these divide and conquer strategies, but nationalism can be a very deceptive thing. So popular education and critical information in social media coverage is so important right now at a time that they're trying to use this small, often forgotten Caribbean and South American nation against its much bigger neighbor, Venezuela. But to insinuate that the Venezuelans somehow have a military intention, that they somehow represent a threat to Guyana is ridiculous. This referendum today was more of a diplomatic exercise to show that the Venezuelan people don't trust the International Court of Justice, which may have a highfalutin sounding name, but certainly does not represent justice and does not represent a truly international community. When they say international community, it's a euphemism that means U.S. interests along with their underlings like the English and the French.
Danny, I'm going to ask you please to hold on a moment because we have to connect with our special set in the headquarters in Caracas. But we're going to be right back with you to continue talking about the referendum. But let's quickly go with the set in Caracas.
So yeah, thanks for being here with us, for staying with us, and also we are going to retake these dialogues that we have been having with experts, with historians, and in this occasion, I'm glad to receive professor, historian, also an economist, Steve Elner, who is joining us today. Okay.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and we are also having with us Denis Rogatyuk, or I don't know if I pronounced that properly.
That was correct.
Okay, my bad if that's not correct.
That's okay.
So we are dialoguing. Denis is also a journalist. He is Russian-Australian, and he is an international analyst, and he's a published author also, I have to say.
International director of El Ciudadano.
Okay. My bad with your credentials there. Well. So in other moments of these interviews today, I was having conversations on the historical pivotal points regarding the dispute on the Guyana Essequiba region between Venezuela and Guyana. Also, we had a conversation on the determinants with ExxonMobil and the oil trades and the interests, and how the plots and the schemes brought two countries to this kind of dispute after having friendly relationships. But given your backgrounds, given your possibilities on this, I'm going to start with Steve. Is that correct?
Sure.
So, given the backgrounds and the possibilities of analysis, now that the referendum is over and now that the outcome is released and is said the victory of the yes option, and the Venezuelan people has said to the world they want to have ownership of their historical rights over the Guyana Essequiba region. What do you think is coming next?
Well, I think, like always, there is a best case and worst case scenario, a most probable scenario. Predictions are hard.
I know.
But I think that there is a possibility that, world public opinion is really sick and tired of permanent war. And there's no question about that. Even in the United States, the surveys indicate, even though the Democratic Party and Republican Party are both war parties, Not much difference between the two when it comes to foreign policy. Nevertheless, the surveys indicate that people don't want it. People are tired of war. Something similar to what happened in the 60s with the Vietnam War. First they supported it, and then they got fed up with it. And I think that that is the atmosphere throughout the world, in the United States, Europe, and the rest of the world. And I think that given that situation, there's a possibility that there will be a lot of pressure for a return to the Geneva Agreement of 1966, which will encourage both sides to sit down and negotiate a solution to the problem, especially considering the fact that Venezuela, has such a historical there's such historical evidence that goes way back to the beginning of the colonial period, that this is really Venezuelan territory.
Exactly. So, Dennis, in your opinion, what comes next?
I believe that it's really important. A very important factor in this case is, of course, the role of other countries in the region, and particularly those that form part of the bodies like the CELAC. And I believe here it's going to be very important for these countries, especially those bordering Venezuela, such as particularly Brazil, to really recognize the importance of the vote that took place on Sunday. More than 10 million people, more than over 50% of the population, demanding, reclaiming sovereignty, reclaiming the right to sovereignty over a region that was stolen from them, and now it's considered to be a disputed region. Yet there, as everyone by now knows, the Guyanese government has allowed a major multinational oil company to begin drilling and exploration of oil within the territory, which not just claimed by Venezuela, but is also considered to be almost like a neutral ground. This is something that other countries also cannot just stand by and let happen. I believe that it will be very important for President Lula, for example, to also speak out and have their say and actually recognize the democratic vote, the popular will of the Venezuelan people, so to speak. Him, Gustavo Petro, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. I believe there is a new necessity for this kind of a coalition against modern day imperialism, which really uses the tactics which continues using the very similar tactics similar to like the 50s and 60s. Back in those days, it was the United Fruit Company. Now it's the ExxonMobil. It's behind a lot of the interventions in the region.
Precisely, you were going on a topic that I was dialoguing before with one of our prior guests, and we were talking about how the neoliberal governments and far-right governments in Latin America allowed the presence of the Southern Command and the military pressure of the U.S. on Venezuela. That was the case of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil and Iván Duque in Colombia. But those administrations, we know what happened. They dissolved. They went away in democratic elections, and now Gustavo Petro is the president of Colombia, and now also Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva is again for a new term the president of Brazil. Those are governments that have a progressive approach towards Venezuela and towards other countries in the region. So regarding these shifts of power, regarding this change of the power balance in Latin America, how do you think the Southern Command is going to find another guidance, find another ground, or how is it going to react? Because it's losing power or it's losing ground in some extent.
Right. Well, I think that, that has to do with politics in the United States. And I'm not particularly optimistic in the sense that, as I mentioned before, the difference between the Democratic and Republican Party, the leadership of the United States, there's a big difference when it comes to domestic issues. There's no question about that. The Democrats are centrists and the Republicans are rightists on domestic issues. But on foreign policy, sometimes the Republicans, or some Republicans, tend to be a little bit more in favor of an isolationist policy, which translates itself into a more peaceful policy. And sometimes they're more warlike than the Democrats. But in general, they are both really on the same page. So I think something along the lines what Dennis was saying, that the pressure of the progressive governments, not so much the existence of progressive governments, but the role that they play is going to be crucial. And I think that presidents like Lula and Petro are going to play a key role in this regard, putting pressure on the United States to abandon military options and to promote another kind of strategy that will lead itself to possible negotiations between Guyana and Venezuela.
Your opinion, Dennis?
If I'm not mistaken, just recently, several days ago, or approximately a week ago, the Guyanese government actually, I believe it signed a decree or a law that actually allowed the deployment of foreign military troops or military bases in Guyana. If I'm not mistaken.
Well, the Southern Command has a close relationship with the government of Guyana. That's not a secret.
Yes.
And just 2 days ago, like on December the 1st, they handed over a military hospital worth over $1 million to Guyana's government, while Irfan Ali, the president of that nation, was at the COP28. He was taking part. He was attending the conference.
I believe this is actually kind of an indicator of where things could be going, and I do believe that Guyana could actually be seen as a new launch pad for possible military intervention into Venezuela, because Colombia, even though United States has invested tens and tens of billions of dollars into it over the last 30 years or so, under the guise of fighting the war against drugs, but Colombia fundamentally has changed with the arrival of Gustavo Petro as a president, and of course the military conflict as the military conflict there has certainly decreased in the intensity. So Colombia seems less and less like a viable option to launch some kind of a military intervention into Venezuela. Guyana, on the other hand, could actually, with this kind of territorial dispute, actually would serve as a perfect reason for the United States to try to intervene into Venezuela, under the guise of protecting the territorial integrity of Guyana. So we can certainly imagine a scenario whereby the Guyanese government and the United States military forces based in Guyana would authorize the use of a military option as a possible preemptive strike, if they believe that Venezuela seeks to reclaim the territory that is theirs, even through peaceful means. I believe this is possible. I believe this is on the cards.
Well, I just hope that stays as a forecast. Okay, I just hope that for the best.
We all do, but we can. We always have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
Yeah, well, let's hope for the best, and let's also be the voices for those who still need the translation of Latin America, because Latin America is hard even for us, the Latin American people, the Latin people. So even you can imagine for the people that is living in other parts of the world and does not speak Spanish and does not get a full overview of these matters and these problems.
You know, there's another element, and that is that we're approaching an electoral cycle in the United States. Presidential elections occur in November of next year. And we all know that when a president, when a particular candidate needs a few more votes in order to win, and it looks like it's going to be a tight race given the weakness of President Biden, that it's quite possible that the Democrats may use this as an excuse in order to gain support, gain more votes, especially in key states like Florida. And it's also possible that the Republican candidate uses this issue for the same purpose. So,
well, it will be nothing new. You know, the orchestrator and the plotting and the scheming for hierarchy and gaining power. So this was our moment. This was our dialogue. I'm honored and I'm glad of receiving you here. Thank both of you for waiting on us and waiting for teleSUR.
Well, it was a pleasure to be on the program.
Okay. We will be glad to receive you again anytime.
Sure.
So this was our time. This was our dialogue here. And now I'm giving you back the signal. Back to you, Luis.
Thank you, Gladys, for all the hard work during the day to continue informing on this historic referendum, consultative referendum that was held in Venezuela for defense of the Essequibo territory. Let's now continue talking with Danny Shaw, Professor of International Study at the Public University of New York. We were previously talking with the professor, but we had to cut short the conversation, but now we retake the dialogue with Professor Danny Shaw. Professor, can you hear us?
100% loud and clear from the belly of the beast here in New York City.
Perfect. That sounds like Jose Marti once said in his writings. Danny, continue talking about the Essequibo and the future that it might bring after this referendum, also taking into account the region, because this is not only something that involves Venezuela and Guyana, we could say, but also the region. We have CARICOM, we have all the different regional groups, and how can the future come after today's important referendum?
Well, as the two analysts were laying out, the global class struggle continues to play out across South America and across the Caribbean. We saw a real pivot to the right with Javier Milei, the latest Trump kind of Bolsonaro wannabe, in his victory in Argentina. That came as very tough news. But we've seen big victories in Brazil about a year ago. Peru is going through a very tough time. This week is the 1-year anniversary of the coup in Peru. So the U.S., whether it's a Democratic regime or Republican regime, is going to continue to look for proxy forces that are hostile to the Bolivarians. The Bolivarians in Venezuela have received the most hostile treatment. Why? Because they're the spearhead of South American unity and South American integration. And despite the most cruel sanctions that began in 2014 under the Barack Obama regime, the Venezuelan people have pushed through. They've got rid of this Juan Guaido proxy force that Trump and then Biden had been pushing for so long. So despite the hybrid war, despite the theft of $2 billion in Venezuelan gold by the Bank of England, despite all of the threats and intimidation, we can see that the Bolivarian people continue to stand by their leadership and fight for a unified anti-imperialist South America.
Danny, speaking of the U.S. foreign policy, we have to talk about the Monroe Doctrine, which can be a very clear example here in this case of what is happening. And in this occasion, coincidentally, in Venezuela, there was a forum celebrating the 200 years of resistance against the Monroe Doctrine. How present, how in current times is the Monroe Doctrine still active, if it is, and what is its impact on the region today?
Yeah, today the Monroe Doctrine could be called the Southern Command Doctrine or the Laura Richardson Doctrine or the Biden Doctrine. They continue to have no respect for the economic and resource sovereignty and political, diplomatic, and military sovereignty of the Venezuelan people, of the diverse nations of South America. And when countries like Iran or Russia try to break this hermetically sealed U.S. blockade of Venezuela, the U.S. again responds with aggression surrounding Venezuela, with U.S. gunboats, with 9 U.S. military bases in Colombia, another 11 U.S. military bases in Panama. But because things have shifted to the left in Colombia, and because there is social tumult led by workers and students in Panama, the U.S. intelligence community and the Pentagon and the State Department and the foreign policy establishment are constantly surveilling where their weak points are. And Venezuela has been one of their biggest weak points. That's why in 2015, ExxonMobil, trying to conspire with their Guyanese lackeys, who they're trying to buy off with the promise of handsome profits from the exploitation of the Essequibo, that region, that's why this vote, this resounding yes on all 5 votes today in this national referendum comes as an important countermeasure to the ICJ's decision recently saying that this region belongs to Guyana. But how can it belong to Guyana when all of these borders were drawn up in London, in Paris, and in the colonial metropolises, and not in Caracas, and not in Georgetown, where these agreements have to be hashed out by representatives of the people of those respected nations?
Venezuela stands on its side that the Geneva Agreement is the only path to settle the dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, because they outright reject the 1899 arbitration award that was pretty much negotiated between the States and the British Empire, leaving completely Venezuela off the negotiating table without a say in that moment. Now, seeing the images, Danny, of the celebrations of the people, I need to ask you, is Venezuela an example of how democratic processes should be held in the world? As we saw, the authorities have expressed the security and efficiency of the electoral system, and every time that Venezuela goes to the polls, we see them celebrating as if it was a national party to express their right in the polls of the will of the future they want for the country.
Yeah, contrary to all of the rhetoric and propaganda that we hear in Las Entrañas de la Bestia, to quote Jose Marti, here in the belly of the beast, we don't hear one positive word about Venezuela. Every New York Times headline and Daily News and New York Post headline is completely anti-Venezuelan. It's complete war and propaganda seeking to justify more invasions and occupations of Latin America, as if the 200 plus invasions in the last 200 years, reflecting the arrogance of the Monroe Doctrine, was not enough. But any visitor to Venezuela can feel the people's patriotism, the people's pride in their country, a super rich country that the people want to develop. And that's what this democratic vote, that's what this national referendum was all about. The Venezuelan people, I don't think there's a way for us here in the imperial center to ever imagine what the Venezuelan people have gone through in the past decade since Hugo Chavez's death. Nicolas Maduro has had almost an impossible job keeping this nation of 30 million on its feet, despite the cruelest of blockades. And as part of the U.S. hypocrisy, they deny that there even is a diplomatic, military, and economic blockade and hybrid war on the Venezuelan people. So certainly today is a victory, not just for the humble forces within Venezuela, but for workers across the world.
Danny, seeing the results, seeing everything that we have been talking about and everything that has been analyzed in this special program, I have to ask you, in your opinion, what comes next?
Well, there's a big presidential election coming up next year. The PSUV has decided that their candidate will be Nicolas Maduro, and the opposition continues to be fractionalized in many ways, and they continue to do the bidding of their Washington sponsors, Certainly, DC is highly embarrassed and again disgraced in the South American nation of 30 million after the Juan Guaido auction went down the tubes. Imagine in 2019, Trump, in the most dictatorial, tyrannical, despotic of ways, trying to impose the dictator on the Venezuelan people, thinking they could do the same thing they did during the dirty war to Uruguay and Paraguay and Argentina in the 1970s and in 80s. So those who believe in the Monroe Doctrine will never stop. They'll try everything to divide and conquer the region, precisely because they won't stop drooling over this immense wealth. We know that Venezuela is up there with Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran, and we've seen what the U.S. has been willing to do with the bloodbath, with the genocide in Gaza, in Palestine, the invasions of Iraq in 1991 and 2003, a similar type of hybrid war against Iran. So really it's no different, and that's why this vote comes as a victory, not just for Venezuela, but for the 1/3 of the people of the world who wake up every morning under sanctions, very cruel sanctions, that seek to create huge headaches and economic disintegration in all of the blockaded countries from Managua to Tehran to Beijing to Moscow. But this multipolar world is certainly on the horizon, and I think today's vote in Venezuela was a piece of this. And the sooner we have a pluripolar world, as Hugo Chavez laid out some 20 years ago, the sooner that we can find peace, peace for the Palestinian people and peace for all of the blockaded, oppressed nations that I mentioned.
Thank you for your inputs, Danny Show, for this special program on the referendum held in defense of the Guyana Essequiba of Venezuela.
Thank you, teleSUR. Thank you for your coverage.
No, it was always our pleasure to have you here with us. Well, like this, we are coming to an end of this special program that we've been having for the last couple of hours, analyzing the importance of the referendum that was held today in Venezuela, in the whole national territory, in defense of the Guyana Essequiba. We had the participation of different guests and our team in Caracas with Gladys Quesada and Jorge Toso, who together we try to shed light and to bring the details of every aspect of the Guyana dispute so that you, the viewer, is more informed and can be up to date on what is currently happening in the region and how Venezuelans, which is the most important part of today's history, how Venezuelans came united from all different walks of life, came united out to vote to protect their country, their sovereignty, their homeland, and their national integrity, and as the very common song that was played during the whole Venezuela Toda campaign, Venezuela's voted 5 times and 5 times yes. I'm Luis Alberto Mato. See you soon in teleSUR English.